Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Marie-Therese Rossi, and I am the chair of this committee. We are holding this committee in accordance with government guidelines and regulations for holding virtual meetings. So please bear with us if we have any technical hitches. This is so everyone can stay at home as much as possible. As we all know, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so therefore we have to rely on technology. So I hope it all works tonight. The event is also being streamed live, and members of the public and media are welcome to follow the meeting remotely. And I know that we have some members of the public who wish to ask questions when we come to the Grenfell item. So I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who sadly lost their lives in the fire at Grenfell Tower. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So at the start of the meeting, I would ask committee members to switch off their microphone and their camera unless they are about to speak and address the meeting. That saves bandwidth and it makes the meeting run more smoothly. If any councillors wish to speak, but I haven't called them to speak, they can put a Q in the chat column. And I would ask you to only put Qs in the chat column, because if people are having conversations on it, it's quite distracting. And then, yes, so that if you could introduce yourselves, if you're going to speak, say who you are, so that everyone knows who is speaking. And if by any chance my connection drops, I would ask my Vice Chair, Councillor Adrian Beryl-Cox, to take over and chair the meeting. So I will now call on each member of the committee, and I'd ask them to say if they're present, and also at the same time to say whether they have any interests to declare. So first, Councillor Adrian Beryl-Cox.
Present with no interest to declare.
Councillor Matt.
Present.
Councillor Marwan Anagi.
Present, Madam Chair, and nothing to declare.
Councillor Janet Evans.
Present, Madam Chair, nothing to declare.
Councillor Greg Hammond.
Here, ma'am, and nothing to declare.
Councillor David Lindsay.
Here, Chairman, and nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Pat Mason.
Present, Chair, and nothing to declare.
And Councillor Will Pascal.
Present, Chairman, and nothing to declare. Thank you.
So I have apologies for absence from Councillor Kazim Ali. So the first item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 24th of September, which have been circulated and all the committee have read them. And can I sign the minutes? Well, not virtually now, but do you agree that it's a correct record of that meeting?
I agree.
Agreed.
Agree.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, so now we move on to the main paper of the evening, which is the Grenfell Recovery Forward Planning paper. And I'm going to ask Councillor Elizabeth Campbell to introduce the report. I will then say a few words, and then I will take questions first from the committee, then from other councillors who are in the meeting, and then I will go on to residents who would like to say something. So if I could ask Councillor Elizabeth Campbell to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay, you'll remember that in June we presented an update to the committee about what progress we were making against the delivery of the Grenfell Recovery Programme. And since then, we've continued to make progress despite the challenges of COVID. And we've provided detailed updates to each of the individual select committees that have got Grenfell Recovery in their remit. So the focus of this paper tonight is looking forward to the next 3 years. The report sits within the parameters of the Grenfell Recovery Strategy, which we agreed in January 2019, and which covers services through to March 2024. And we committed £50 million of funding to support the delivery of the strategy. And the funding was profiled unevenly because there was more money in the first 2 years. So from April next year, there are 3 years of the programme remaining. And we want to ensure that the remaining funding has really the maximum impact for residents, and that we are absolutely clear on what we're trying to achieve here together, both now and in the longer term. So you'll see from the paper that it sets out in draft plans for the future across the different areas of the programme, and crucially it outlines how residents can shape what the support will be. Because what we've heard from residents is they want to be much more involved in shaping and controlling their own recovery, and also that, you know, people's needs are changing, and we're committed to making that happen. So we're setting out our draft plans in this way then for 3 main reasons. The first of all is to give clarity and greater transparency, so everyone is clearer on what we're all working towards together. And it's also to enable more collaboration and proper partnership working with communities. And finally, it's to really support longer term planning across the council, which will ensure that we leave a tangible long-term legacy from the tragedy in really everything we do. And I just want to take a moment to emphasise that last point about the longer legacy in particular. So what we'd really like to do is to make sure that the remaining 3 years of the programmes is a stepping stone for the longer term change right across the council, so that the recovery efforts aren't just here for 5 years, aren't here for the next 3 years, but they're really embedded in the council and how we operate over the years and years to come. And above all, that means working with residents so that the rest of the council and partners can learn from the way that we operate. And let me give a few examples. So our work with the Grenfell survivors is shaping our wider approach in housing allocations and housing management. Kim can pick up on this and talk to you about that. Our work on the Grenfell Community Programme that Anne's leading on will help shape our wider approach to community engagement and participation. The work that Sarah's leading on is about community commissioning and trauma-based evidence. Anne's doing work in developing more collaborative partnerships with communities which really respect their capabilities and diversity, which will help inform really the whole culture change, the wider culture change here at the council. So ultimately, if it's going to succeed, this programme has to be much part of a wider change in the way that we deliver services, the way we work in partnership. And I'd just like to say we are absolutely committed to driving this change. So with those points in mind, I really welcome comments from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and from wider residents who've come to the committee this evening on the draft proposal for the framework. And in particular, we'd welcome the committee's comments on the planned areas of focus over the next 3 years, the plans to engage residents on the plans in each of those areas, and most importantly, the points about the legacy raised above and how we ensure that the whole council work contributes to establishing a legacy from Grenfell. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth, very much for introducing the report. I have to say, before I take questions, I did like this report. What I like particularly about it is the way it wants to be collaborative with the community, and it wants the community involved and engaged in shaping the recovery programme. So I think that's, it's the right direction for us to go in, because we always make better decisions when we involve our residents in shaping what we do. So the committee has been asked to do 3 things, which is to note and comment on the approach, and then, as Elizabeth said, to look at the areas of focus across the key elements, and then also to look at, and which is set out at the back of the report, the way we are going to monitor and scrutinise the process of this recovery. So yeah, and I've just looking at my notes here, I've been told to say this committee has the overarching responsibility for Grenfell recovery, but we also have the select committees who look at in more detail certain aspects of the programme. So I would like to ask firstly members of the committee if they have any questions or if they have any comments to make, and then I will go to other councillors who are in the meeting. So, Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question is, how do you think the money has been spent thus far? £50 million in the budget, 12 million last year. You may have spent several million this year. You're getting on for a third of the total thus far. How well have we done?
Well, I think that's what we outlined to you in our earlier report in June or July, and then we've also reported back to the individual select committees. But what the paper we're giving you tonight is about the future and how we lay that out and how we've got the money allocated, but what's the best way of spending it? To come back to your question, I think one of the reasons that we've done this is when we brought the report to the OSC in June or July, people said, well, there's no transparency. What have you done with the money, et cetera, et cetera. So hence the reports to the individual select committees. And hence us coming here saying we really need to be transparent over the next few years, and we want to discuss with the community exactly how they wish the money to be spent.
Thank you. Councillor Hammond.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much to the leadership team for presenting the report. I'd be quite interested to hear a little bit more about the plans for the Grenfell Projects Fund and particularly the allocation of Year 2 funding on the 18th of November. How will that work at an online meeting? And in particular, what lessons have been applied from the Year 1 or the first stage of that process to improve it for this the second allocation round?
Yes, I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm going to ask Anne to answer that because she's in charge of that area.
Is Anne there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, just about.
Can you hear me, MT?
Yes.
Sorry, guys, I think I was on mute. I was just saying thank you to Greg for the question. And the first thing that I wanted to say, it's clearly not ideal that we're going to be holding the next Grenfell Assembly online. And I guess I just echo everything that you've said, MT. I think these meetings really, ideally we would have them face to face. And it's good to see everybody in the room, and we're not able to replicate that on Zoom, but we've got to work with what we've got. So the plan is that we're going to try and get as much feedback and comment from those who were successful last year, those who voted last year, those who are interested in applying for the Grenfell Projects Fund this year. We want to hear as much feedback and as much comment on how that Grenfell Project Fund should be run for the next year. And I'm not sure how it's going to go, Greg. I mean, we're completely in the hands of the community, and I hope that whatever we hear on that evening will then help us frame how the next stage of the programme will go. I mean, I can't predetermine anything. In terms of lessons from last year, well, I think it was quite an innovative way of allocating spend. I think I was really happy that we didn't sit in the town hall and decide which projects were successful and which weren't. We really wanted the community to have a say. Was it perfect? No, I'm sure it wasn't. We really were quite ambitious in the size of the participatory budgeting process that we went through. But I think people did appreciate that we were trying to get as many people from the community involved in those decisions. And what I really thought was great was we were able to fund, many projects, some of them really small amounts of money for very local projects. And we've started the reporting on the programmes that were successful last year. And again, we're doing this online on Zoom. Not ideal, but the first one that we did, we had 5 of the successful applicants present. And I think it was really heartwarming, actually. I think there was real excitement about what those teams had managed to achieve. And I really hope that we capture that this year. And I think we will. Exactly what it will look like, I guess I'll be sitting here, I hope, in a few months' time, and I can tell you. But for now, I don't know. It's up to the people that we speak with on the 18th and the consultation we do beyond that.
Thanks very much. Wish you well with it.
Thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Yes, Chair. Like everyone else, I'll be led by what the bereaved families and survivors and the local residents say, because that's clearly what the report says, the direction we should be going. But the report in 4.8, of course, starts, I'm also interested in the future and beyond the 3 years, in effect, because during this 3 years, as it says in 4.8, some of the services and the Curve and Old Court Place, they will be phasing out. So, and it's going to be, by 3 years' time, the Grenfell Inquiry may have reported its second phase. So this is going to continue on for 3 years. And I'll be interested to know what the community want on the bereaved family survivors and the community, what the legacy, what legacy organization or legacy structures do they want to leave behind? Because before 3 years is finished, this program will be a shade of what it is now. It's going to, of course, going to phase out. So I want to hear what they want to do for the next 3 years, whether they want to remove some of the services that I assume they have said they agree to remove, whether they want to us to relinquish some of the buildings and venues that's being used now. I want to hear what they have to say, because there are still groups and people out there amongst the bereaved families and survivors and residents who, of course, haven't agreed with the strategy. Some have, some haven't, and we've all seen the emails pouring through the council from time to time. We may say they're a small number, but they're still there. So I want to know what the residents think. what those residents think, what they want from this strategy over the next 3 years, and are we thinking about what will happen beyond 3 years? Because presumably it won't just fall off the end of a cliff. Everything won't be fixed and finished in 3 years. So we need some kind of legacy beyond 3 years, or I want to hear what they think we should have or they should have, and how it should be funded, how it should be supported by the government, by us, by a combination of all. And of course, we've got COVID, which is an extenuating factor. But I'd like to hear some of that, some answers to some of those things.
Councillor Campbell, would you like to comment on the legacy?
Yes, yes, I will. I think you're absolutely right, Pat. And that's what this paper is saying, that we do listen. We do need to listen to the bereaved and the survivors and the wider community. And we need to listen to them and work with them to make sure that the next 3 years, whatever we put in place, is what they want and what will make the most impact. And you'll see in the dedicated service, one of the things that we're suggesting is that some of the money over the next few years is put to one side so that there isn't a cliff edge, that services can go on. And I understand bereavement advisors are looking at peer-to-peer support. And you're quite right. I think not everyone agrees with the strategy, but you know, if you're bereaved, you're bereaved. If you're a survivor, you're a survivor. We need to listen to everyone's views. And that's the point of this paper, and that's the point of coming now, saying this is just the beginning, this is where we start. Yes, we've talked to people, yes, we've talked to people over the years, but we need to redouble our efforts, we need to reach out, we need to talk to the steering group, listen to what they have to say, refashion our services to make sure that we have the most impact and that we're spending the money in the way that the bereaved, that the survivors and the wider community wish it to be spent, and one in which, as I said, it was there's a sort of stepping stone to the future, because unless we embed the different ways of working that we're using now, there won't be a legacy. So in every single area, we need to think about how we operate, how we behave, how we collaborate with our communities, with the bereaved survivors as equal partners. And how that will lead to the change in the culture of the council that we've always talked about. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and it's about muscle memory, isn't it? And it's about doing things again and again and again, so that as an organisation, at the end of it, you're completely transformed.
Thank you. I'll call Councillor Janet Evans now.
Yes, thank you very much for this. I wanted to say that I thought the beauty of it is that we are listening to the community and it's flexible, because people are going to be in different stages of recovery. People have different needs. And I think the way this has been laid out is very fluid, and I'm very happy with it personally. And there are lessons to be learned, but positive lessons as well. And these are lessons that we will be able to take forward in terms of education and training, and also in terms of the COVID situation. These are lessons that are specific to trauma, and I think we can learn a lot from it. And I'm very happy with this report. Thank you very much.
Can I just pick up on what Janet said about opportunities? Because, as she said, there are opportunities to do things differently and to use money differently and be flexible and respond. And you might just want to hear from Kim about the opportunities in housing and what he's doing there. Mm-hmm. Might illustrate it well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think, you know, we talk about legacy and change, but obviously that's actually different to different people. And I think the legacy for Lancaster West, for Nottingdale, for North Kensington and for the borough is very much what we need to do in terms of provisions of housing and key worker housing. And that's something which we're working on very hard with. and importantly doing that with our residents and in consultation so they can feel part of that journey. And we've got an ambitious programme. That's one legacy. I think the legacy of housing management and how we look after people's homes, that's another very important legacy. And again, that's something which has started on Lancaster West. We're doing things in a much different way. I'm pleased to see that we've got Lancaster West Residents Association here, and they might like to comment on that. But that's very much involving local people in the management of their housing. And that's something which, as a model, I would very much like to see extending beyond Lancaster West in due course. So I think that's two important aspects of it. I think two specific parts of a legacy which are incorporated in this paper on page 15 is looking at the Housing Legacy Fund and Housing Allocation Pilot Scheme, which is very much in its embryonic stage at the moment. This is a framework and it's very much part of a consultation. So these are still things very much work in progress, and we've begun working with our local RAs and Lanc West and key stakeholders to put plans on how we can put this into place. And I think both of these projects are really exciting opportunities for us to do something in a different way. The Housing Legacy Fund is something for estates and for the immediate area surrounding the tower. And then we're proposing a fund for all estates in Nottingdale, aiming to support the legacy projects. And the money on that will be allocated to estates based upon their size. And we'll invite residents to come up with ideas and decide with them on what we're doing. That and these conversations are coming on. The allocations pilot policy is again at very early stage, and that's really for us to learn from the Grenfell tragedy and focus on residents' experiences and how that might shape our current allocations policy and how we look at working. And we are working on that allocations policy at the moment, and it's something we will come out in terms of with our consultation with residents before we obviously go out and then launch that. So, I mean, that's really what I see as a legacy from housing.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Chowan, you had you wanted to ask a question.
Just a point of clarification, really, and picking up on the previous question on the funding for recovery. I'm just going back to that. There's a statement there saying in 3.8 that roughly half of the half of this was committed to services for bereaved and survivors, and the other half for initiatives in the local community. Looking at the kind of table, which is very helpful in 3.9, I'm just trying to work out out of the 12,000 in the first 2 years, what kind of proportion was given to the bereaved and survivors on one hand, and on the other to the local community? That's my question.
Shall I answer that? On the whole, what we've tried to do is make sure that it's completely, we started from the premise that the only fair way of doing this was to divide the finances between the bereaved and survivors and the local community. And the local community were divided up between targeted support and the wider support more generally. So that's the principle we've had. And in some years there's a slight shift because there's other money which came in, or for example, going forward, as I mentioned, I think some of the bereaved and survivors want to keep a bit of money back so they don't find a cliff edge at the end of 3 years. But the basic principle is of dividing any of the 50 million between the bereaved and survivors on one hand and the wider community on the other.
It's very helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there any other members of the committee who wish to ask a question? And then I'll move on to other councillors. So Councillor Inagi or Councillor Pascal, Councillor Beryl-Cox, do you wish to ask a question?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I was just going to put my hand up. The allocated fund for the Grenfell last year, just pre-pandemic, we know some projects they cannot be done because of the health restriction. So what percentage of those projects being carried, and what help being put in place for those cannot be carried within that context? Do we have an idea? Do we have any feedback on that?
Yes, Anne, perhaps you could come in on that one.
Thank you.
So for exactly the numbers of how many have successfully been able to deliver, I may ask Callum to comment on exactly what those numbers are. But we have worked with every single successful applicant to try and move their project online. Now, there are some things like the swimming, for example, that is impossible to do in a lockdown. So, you know, those projects have had to wait, but there are others that have moved online really, really successfully. And Moan, you know, I'd encourage you to come to some of the presentations that the Grenfell Project Fund are doing. We're doing them monthly now, and we invite 5 projects to come and present. And really, it gives you a real flavour of the kind of things that are happening because of that fund. And please, I really would encourage you to come. But maybe I can ask Callum if he could comment on exactly what the numbers are of what we've been able to proceed with and what's been put on hold.
Thanks, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it is roughly around a third, as I understand it, of the projects have been able to be delivered as they are. And I know officers are working hard from our communities department also to work with some of the different initiatives to think about how they might be able to adapt some of their ideas for the COVID world that we find ourselves in. So we're definitely not resting on our laurels, and we're definitely trying to get as much support out as we can in the context we find ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Callum. That's very encouraging. It's a good proportion, to be honest, a third, which is excellent. And thank you for joining me on my walk about in Nottingdale, Callum. It was a really good insight. And to the rest of the committee, it was an excellent experience, I think. And we kept our distance, so it was a safe walkabout. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Councillor Will Pascal, you would like to ask a question?
Thank you very much, Chairman. The question I wanted to ask is that from this programme, how has it been adapted in the short term to help the children who've been affected by lack of schooling and their presence at school earlier in the year, and then during the current period? Has there been some additional help therefore brought to bear for those within these groups to help them catch up and to bring their mental health and well-being back together as best possible in the circumstances because of the delay of COVID?
Can I ask Josh to come in and answer that, because he'll be able to give you everything about past, present and future.
Great. Well, thank you, Will, and a really good question. And we covered this separately previously in the Family Services Select Committee, but in relation to children, yes, there have been, of course, challenges in educating children over the course of the COVID period. But however, I think all our schools have done very well with it. We've used our great voluntary services to obviously help the children out. We still got services such as LCAT and Kids on the Green, who are still very, very active in helping children and the bereaved and the survivors, of course, with that, especially within the community over the COVID period. I did visit Henry Dickens and LCAT over the summer period to see how they were going, and they had done an enormous job in ensuring that the children there get the best possible support. Again, which is in part funded by the Grenfell recovery strategy here. In terms of going forward, I think we've learnt some really good lessons on what happened over the first lockdown. Again, we had great services and all the support from the officers. We had great safeguarding techniques in place. We had people following up constantly with children and those who were in need of safeguarding to ensure that they were getting the best support that they were, and they absolutely did. And then going forward, in relation to your second part of the question, we are focusing on what's best for the community. So, for example, as you may see in the report, that we have floated the idea that schools themselves may be better placed to commission their own services. They know their children better than the council. It's not up to me, it's not up to officers to dictate what the community wants or what the survivors or the bereaved want, especially children, because, of course, Grenfell is an intergenerational challenge. So we've worked very, very hard to put all these procedures in place in order to ensure that those now, but also going forward many, many years, will get the support they need.
Thank you very much.
So if there are no other questions from members of the committee, I will then go to Councillor Judith Blakeman, who has put her hand up, and I'll come to the residents shortly. Councillor Blakeman.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 questions and a comment. Am I allowed to make them all?
You can make, yes, you can comment and ask questions.
Well, I'll start off with a comment, and that is that I'm sure that local councillors would attend the presentations from project successful funders if we were invited to them, but I don't recollect having been invited to any of them so far. My first question is I would like to know what discussions have been had with the registered providers who provide social housing within 500 metres of Grenfell Tower concerning the needs of their tenants. And this would include residents of RP provided housing actually on the Lancaster West estate itself, which are Octavia Housing with Pomeroy Court and Anchor Housing with Thomas Darby Court, because when I visited about a year after the fire, I was told that nobody had spoken to them. And my second question is a sort of follow-up on Greg's question, and I would like to know what steps you're going to take with the second round of the projects programme to ensure that, firstly, residents who are not as articulate as some of the people who presented their case can be engaged with this in future, and also how you're going to ensure that money is not wasted, and how you will ensure that there's no duplication, because there's been a lot of duplication on some of the projects. I mean, some of the projects have been absolutely brilliant, and some of them, frankly, have been a waste of money. I agree with Councillor Nagi that the walkabout we had with Mr. Wilson is very positive, and I hope to see fruits coming from that. Sorry, I've run out of gas.
Okay.
I'm still so angry about the whole business. I find it very difficult to sort of put things into context.
Can I suggest that Kim answer? No, I was just going to say perhaps Kim would answer the housing question, and Anne the special projects, and perhaps Anne, you'd pick up on Councillor Blakeman's point of not being invited.
Hello. Right, so thanks, Judith, for the question. Octavia Housing, yes, I have met with the Chief Executive, Graham Hind, as I'm doing my rounds around with all of the RPs, really setting out our stall with them with regard to the issues that we have in terms of quality, and most importantly also in terms of nominations, because we don't believe that we're getting a fair crack of the whip when it comes to getting nominations out of our RPs. We've just recruited to our housing allocations team people to have dedicated work with the RPs, because clearly, and I smile when I say this to you, we are aware of a lot of issues in terms of standards. I do find it appalling that on Lancaster West, that the Lancaster West W11 team are undertaking maintenance and repairs on properties which we don't own. Yes. But clearly that's something that we need to address and encourage people to do. but it's not going to be a quick fix with housing associations. We're again lobbying and talking to government about what other pressures or controls we could put on with RPs to make sure that we get performance, recognising that within our borough the housing associations have almost 4 times the amount of housing stock than we own.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't criticise the way that the council has engaged with the residents of its own housing, but I would criticise the way that some of the housing associations have engaged with their residents, who are equally traumatised, who lost friends, relatives, neighbours in the fire, and nothing has been done for them as yet by their own landlords.
And I completely agree with you, Judith, and I rely on you to bring cases to me on instances where that's happening, and we will take up the challenge on behalf of people who find themselves in accommodation that's not fit for purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So, Anne, would you like to answer Judith's second question?
If it will help, Anne
you are muted.
Anne and I did meet with one of the successful projects earlier today and discovered various things that have gone wrong with that project that shouldn't have gone wrong.
Okay, well, thank you, Judith. What I was saying to myself was I really apologise to you and to your colleagues. I really try to involve local councillors and really value that contribution, and I'm very sad that you didn't get invited. I will personally make sure that you are invited to all the subsequent meetings, and I will do that personally, and I really unreservedly apologise that that invitation was not forthcoming, because I would really like you to see some of those presentations. Look, I think on your question, I mean, there's 3 things I wrote down on what you're asking. How do we help those who perhaps aren't so articulate in making sure their voices are heard, their ideas are heard? Well, I think what we did last year is we really tried to encourage everybody who wanted to apply to contact us so that we could give them bespoke one-to-one support for that application. There were a number of people who did not want to stand up on stage and give the presentation, so we supported them with videos. I think things will obviously be different again this year, but I put out the invitation to anybody that they can contact me personally, and I will help them with their application. I think, everybody needs to have an opportunity to present their ideas for this project fund. And I think Judith and Marwan, if anybody comes to you and says, I really want to apply, but I'm worried or I don't know how, please send them to me, and I will make sure that they get that support, because we want as many people as possible to feel part of this. In terms of the duplication, well, Judith, I would say, that's your view. I think I would say we have to trust our communities. At the end of the day, it was an open vote. I didn't vote. Our local residents voted on what they wanted to see, on what projects they liked, and I think we have to trust them. Perhaps there is duplication, but frankly, we've said it's up to them, and I wouldn't want to, and I wouldn't want anyone else to interfere in that. I think your point about wasted projects and projects that haven't quite worked out. Well, again, I go back to my point about the support. We've really tried to support those projects. I mean, A, as they're moving online, but B, as they're adapting to the new world. And again, please, Judith, call me if you think there's something that's going wrong with one of the projects, and we will do what we can to, we want these things to succeed. And, we're not working with highly organized, trained organizations. It's supposed to be for people that have great ideas that haven't been able to make them happen in the past. So often it's just one person or a team of 2 or 3 people, and they do really need that support, and we want to offer it. So again, I would ask that you give that feedback to me and any of the officers in community engagement. And once again, I just really want to apologise for your missing invitation, and I will make sure that you will receive them from now on. And thank you for your question. I think they're really, really good points. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We did sign up to the Hillsborough Charter, and the Hillsborough Charter did say that we should also take account of the needs of the wider community of any tragedy. And I think this is only just beginning to happen, and it should have happened some time ago. I haven't asked any questions about people living in the private sector, but there are also people living in the private sector who have issues, and I will bring them to you separately.
So can I ask if there are any other councillors who are in the meeting who would like to ask a question now, if they'd like to speak up? I can't see any. Okay, so I will move on to our residents. Next of kin have had their hand up for a while, and then I will call Abbas. So if someone from next of kin would like to ask their questions or make comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm here representing the next of kin group, that is 27 of the victims of the fire, the actual next of kin. This is not bereaved or a wider circle of bereaved families or residents. These are the actual legal next of kin. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask questions on their behalf. There's two parts to this, really. I've read this report and we've discussed this report. On page 19, the appendix, which is the proposed allocation of resources across the next 3 years, has a breakdown of what has been spent so far. In the first paragraph, it says, in 2019-2020, 12 million was spent from the ring fence, 50 million pounds, and another 20 million was another 12 million was for this financial year. Now, what it doesn't say, and perhaps councillors and officers should really address this issue, is that 85%, something like 85% of that 12 million pounds was actually spent on infrastructure costs. So it is slightly disingenuous to say that 12 million was spent on half of that 12 million pounds. If you go to the bottom of that, the last paragraph, it says roughly half of the funding was to be spent on services for bereaved and survivors and half on the wider community. We are only speaking about the £6 million supposedly spent on bereaved and survivors. And actually, when we look at the breakdown of what that 6 million was spent on, it was entirely spent on infrastructure and running costs of delivering the what was just over £1 million in actual services for the bereaved and survivors. So it is not 6 million. It is something like 1.3 million that was spent on actual services. The rest is for rent, salaries, and so on and so forth. And when you break it down, it works out to basically something like £60,000 a week to deliver £20 a week for the 648, which I think has gone up to about 670 people now who are eligible for the dedicated service. In other words, the council has ring-fenced £12 million, is claiming that £6 million is being spent on dedicated service for bereaved and survivors, but actually £60,000 a week is being spent on infrastructure and to deliver £20 a week for the actual victims. So that's the first thing I want to really focus on, because we've been discussing this internally, and it is really quite objectionable and obscene and disproportionate. The second question is to focus on is, from our understanding, and this is not something that anyone in the next of kin has been involved in, the Grenfell Projects Fund, the last round apparently had 50 people who actually voted for an allocation of £600,000. That is 50 people who chose what that £600,000 should be spent on. That is hearsay. I'd like to know if that is actually accurate, how many people are actually involved in the voting. And the last but not least is the anomaly that from the majority of our next of kin, some of whom have lost 4 or 5 members of their family, or even if they've just lost one person, they're unable to access any of the individual budgets because of the anomaly that was the no recourse to public funds, because they're here on visas that prohibit them from accessing public funds. And this is something that the council needs to get behind, to advocate and clarify with the Home Office, to make sure that this specific area doesn't apply to them. It's understandable that there are visa restrictions for a normal business and visitors to this country. But this is not normal business. And the person who has lost their entire family, who happens to be here because of the inquiry, because of the investigations, because of the legal matters that have risen from it, is just as much in need of support and recovery, whether they're here on a 6-month visa, whether they're here on an annual visa, or whether they're citizens. The two things have nothing to do with each other. And we're shocked that the council and the Home Office and the government have not really dealt with this issue. They should not be barred from it, because all of this money and all of these activities are only in place because of the 72 people who died. If those people had not died in such violent and terrifying deaths, there would be none of these activities. There would have been a burnt building. There would have been some recovery in the area. That building would have been brought down and something else would have gone up in its place. There are plenty of examples where there are dreadful fires, floods, what have you. All of these activities are because of the 72 people who died, and yet the next of kin of these families are actually sidelined and unable to access support because of this visa anomaly. And last but not least, we understand that 4.6 million was apportioned to the FFAC and Grenfell United back in February 2018, and that contract and that funding came to an end, or comes to an end, in November this month. We'd like to ask, what arrangements have the council made for funding for Grenfell United and its premises and its staffing, if at all?
So thank you very much for your questions. I think we'll take them one by one, so that you get a decent answer to all of them. So we'll start with the one about how much money has been spent on infrastructure. I think maybe Callum might come in, and Elizabeth. I don't know who would like to come in first.
Shall I come in generally first, and then Callum could perhaps pick up the detail. First of all, actually, I'd like to pick up on the no recourse to public funds, because, as you say, it is a government. It is something that the government need to do, and I do understand, Kimmy, that you've met with the Home Secretary and with our IMP, and so I would say, I encourage you to carry on pressing them, because it's really for them to decide that. Secondly, on the dedicated service, yes, we do have quite high structural amounts in there, because it's staffing, and 94% of bereaved and survivors have touched into the dedicated service to talk to support staff, over the last few weeks, few years. So that's where the majority of the money is. But and thirdly, I'd like to say that actually, if you want to look at the detail, I don't know whether it's been to the Select Committee for Health and for Public Health, or whether it could go, but that's where you'd find all the details of that, because again, tonight we're talking about what it will be. This is the framework for the next 3 years, but for the actual breakdown of how the money's been spent of the last 2 years, I'll ask Callum to comment, but it is something that the select committees could look at.
Thanks, Councillor, and thanks, Kimia, for the question. In terms of the budget and in terms of the figures quoted, I think from the 6 million, a proportion of that money is spent on housing costs, and the rest has been spent on the dedicated service. I think some of the percentages that were quoted were from the 2019-20 budget, and actually we've been working very closely with the dedicated service steering group partly in response to some of the challenges that the Grenfell Next of Kin Group and others have raised, but to look at those costs. For example, we've reduced management costs over the last year by 50%. And so we're really trying to ensure and trying to take that challenge on board and ensure that as much of the money is spent as possible on things that a bereavement survivor can feel actually as a frontline service. And just re-echoing Elizabeth's point, so that does include some of the direct services, but also it does include particularly our frontline staff and our dedicated workers, for whom many of the bereavement survivors do have very strong relationships with and are a crucial part of the offer. Now, I completely understand that the offer isn't right for everyone, and we work tirelessly to try and improve it so that it is as good as it can be and reaches as many people as possible. But we remain open to listening and having conversations about ways we may be able to adapt the service so that it can reach even more people.
And can I just add to that? And I think that is also the point of this paper, saying that, you know, we have got another 3 years of funding here, and how should we spend that in a way that impacts the bereaved and the survivors and the rest of the community the most. And as Callum has said, we're absolutely dedicated to working with bereaved and survivors to ensure that how that money is spent has the best impact that it possibly can.
Thank you very much for your answers. But I guess what I'm trying to say, and what we've been trying to say, and we have said consistently for the last 2 years, is that there's a question of choice. I think if people had realised the disproportionate spend that is being spent in their name, they probably would have said, they absolutely would have said, it's not justified that over £60,000 a week is spent to deliver £20 a week. That's just bonkers. It wouldn't be justified in any field. But furthermore, when you talk about 94%, I think you said, or 98%, or whatever the percentage was that Callum said, of bereaved and survivors who've accessed the dedicated service, again, it's the question of not being informed and not understanding what the real cost of that actually is, because you've hired and you've set up a structure and a system and then said, here are these people, and then they call the individuals, and every time they call, that goes down as a tick that they've made contact. But actually, in real terms, in terms of what it's actually delivering, I think given the choice, people will say, well, no, I don't really need someone to call me once every 2 weeks or once a month to say, how are you all right? You know, there may be some people who are very dependent on their dedicated service workers, but even if they were told what the true cost of that is, I think it just puts a completely different light on it. And lastly, we have questioned and raised this even with the government. You know, what is the logic for the council from a standstill kind of position, a council that is at the heart of a major public inquiry and a police and criminal investigation, to be in charge of delivering recovery in the first place to the victims? I mean, in no other sphere of life or crime would the people who are under investigation be responsible for delivering recovery. I mean, we can't deny the fact that the role of a council is very much central to this terrible tragedy. In the same way as a victim would not be put in the hands of a potential victimizer or someone who's in charge of or is at the center of an investigation. So I think the whole premise was really wrong, and it hasn't been corrected. And by the time, and the clock is ticking, and as the clock ticks, another 12 million will be spent, and another 10 million will be spent, and we'll be having these conversations. It's just not a very good use of public money, and it's really not actually delivering. And in terms of the services that you've commissioned, even the things you've commissioned, there are plenty. Take the gym offer, for instance, that the dedicated service was so proud of offering this gym service. People were literally being forced to join up, and they were told by the dedicated services, the workers, well, it's there, it's on offer, you might as well join. if you don't, you'll just be, the money won't come back to you in any other shape or form. So there's a great deal of, there's a lot of ambiguity here, and I think that it's time that we all really face the facts.
Okay, can I come in? I thank you very much for coming and for your questions. I understand what you're saying about, why is the council, dealing with the recovery. I understand where you're coming from and why you think that, but that is how it is. That is the situation, that it is up to the council to try and help recovery in the community. So I would then go for your second question about the specifics of the Grenfell Project Fund. I'd go to Anne Siren. Perhaps she could answer your question about the 50 people voting on £600,000 worth of project.
Well, thank you, Auntie, and thank you, Kimia, for your question. I need to check exactly how many people registered and came, but from memory, there was about 150 on day one and about 100 on day two. But I would stress here that everybody in those wards was invited to attend. It was highly publicised. Everybody had the chance to come and vote on what they wanted to see. So no, it wasn't 50 people. I would hope that we will get more this year involved in that process.
Thank you. Is there an answer regarding the further funding for the FFAC this year? Because their funding for Grenfell United, which was £4.6 million from February 2018, comes to an end in November. What are the plans?
Who would like to take that question about the funding for Grenfell United and their premise?
I might ask Callum to give me the detail on that. But the other things that Kimia has brought up, we can write to you, Kimia, and give you an absolute breakdown of figures and where the money's been spent. I don't have the details to hand, but we can certainly do that.
Thank you, Councillor. And I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but could we also correspond as to how we can come together to try to lobby the government to pay attention to this issue of the no recourse public funds, because obviously the council is a major player in being able to help support this request so that we deal with this matter.
Well, as I said, I think you've probably got more influence than us, Kimia, having already met the Home Secretary. But I can certainly ask our MP to see what she can do, because I'm not sure what the possibilities are, because I think you've almost exhausted every route, but we can certainly see.
Thank you.
So Callum, could I ask you to answer the point about Grenfell United and the lease ending in November?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, and just to build on that point about the overseas relatives, we really are very committed to supporting those families, and the council is supporting them as much as we can. There are restrictions, but it is a key part of our offer, and we're always happy to try and see how we can help the families as they find themselves within the laws that we can apply. In regards to the question about Grenfell United, I think I know the paper that's being referred to. So the council doesn't pay for Grenfell United space, nor for the rent, nor for the staffing. There was a government grant, and the government grant does have continued. We do have money to be able to continue, and conversations are underway. In regards to the FFAC, which is where the council is, so it's a bit dark in here, I just realised. We are looking, and it's referenced in the paper, that we're aware that the lease does end in June 2022. And I think it's a key point in conversation to have with bereaved families and survivors around whether that's something that people want to continue and how we utilise it going forwards.
Thank you.
So the funding for GU comes from the government, not from the council?
Yes, and we facilitate it. So that paper talks about facilitation.
Okay, thank you.
So I will now call on Abbas Dadu from the Lancaster West Residents Association to ask some questions.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm with David here. They will ask some questions.
David as well. Okay.
So using one laptop. I think the impact and effects of Grenfell tragedy won't go away anytime soon, and the community, and I'm sure it will apply the same for bereaved and survivors. It's going to be a long way. Probably some won't even heal, but even our children and all the residents who witnessed this horrific disaster, they gonna need a lot of time and a lot more help to be able to deal with this. I would like to know what is RBKC's long-term plan and commitment towards this.
Shall I ask some questions? Just to focus in actually on the report. I mean, I like the report. It's good. It shows a change of direction of the council's thinking, and I think it's good because there was a lot of time, there was a lot of focus on big groups and passing through preferred providers, which I think at the time was one way of doing it, but now I think there's a much stronger focus on actually asking people what they want and where it goes. And that's one of the things I want to bring up as a legacy for all of these projects. I think it's very important to make sure that the funding goes to good projects that achieve good outcomes. I know that sounds like a stating the obvious, but I want to make sure that the money goes into projects that when the money goes away, will still keep going because they're actually serving a need and people are enjoying them. And I think that's a really important thing about all of this, that it isn't seen as a sort of bolt on of some extra massage and treatments for people in the area because they're in trauma, and they still are in trauma, a lot of people around here, but that it's putting in place services to help people get further on in their lives and achieve more. I mean, yeah, I mean, the things that have been missing in the area for so many years. And I would like it to become a model for the council that they could roll us across all of the borough, because that way it means it won't go away. I mean, they'll be looking at this and saying, oh, great, this is a good model. This is how we should fund things. And that comes to all of the things. I mean, the Grenfell Projects has raised a lot of controversy. I know it's a small part of the money, but the way the projects were chosen, I can understand the desire to give everyone a chance to do stuff. But I think it's really important that you get good quality projects and maybe have less of them next year, but make sure that they're actually filling some sort of gap. And also, you've got to look at what they achieve. I know there's lots of numbers in the reports that say, oh, so many people attended this day, so many people did that. But what I really care about is what happened, who had an outcome that was successful for them, rather than measuring how many people came to the event. I mean, so, 20 people came to a consultation event doesn't really tell you much about what it actually achieved. And I think it's the outcomes that you need to look at as part of this whole process. Just looking back on some of the stuff that happened before, I'd love to know, I remember we had a meeting with Robin back in the summer last year, and she actually broke down some of the numbers of where all this goes, because it's still quite vague. It talks about a certain amount of money going to school support, but I don't know what schools that goes to and what it provides for in those schools. So if it was possible to have a more detailed breakdown of all of that, I know it exists because Robin outlined some of the where some of the money went in the summer that time, but I've noticed that's not even minuted in that meeting, and I can't find any detail apart from the actual response that Robin gave us. So if it's possible to get a more detailed breakdown of what's been spent and where it's going, that will be a great start to saying this is going to be a more open, inclusive process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to comment? And then maybe Anne?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's exactly why we wanted to have a framework like this, because, in the summer you did come and people asking exactly where the money went, etc. Whereas on this way around, we're saying, well, okay, here is the money. These are the envelopes in which it's going to go into. And now we need to have a proper discussion with the community to figure out how best it is that money should be spent, so that we, exactly as you say, David, so that it's not just about figures, it's about the impact and the outcomes, because that will be the long-lasting legacy that Abbas has asked about. So I'm going to ask Josh to pick up on this now, so he can talk about some things in his area to give you a sort of concrete example.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Abbas, and thank you, David, and thank you so much for your time as well this evening and coming to speak with us and raise the great points that you have raised. So I'm Josh. I lead the Families and Children's Services portfolio at the council, and I think, David, your a particular question as well on what we're doing for the future and how it's going to continue is a really, really good one. So in terms of my particular portfolio, of course, Grenfell is an intergenerational challenge. It's going to be affecting many people for many years, especially children who witnessed the tragedy and their ongoing mental health and well-being support. So what we've done the previous year, as you've probably read from the report, is that we've had a certain amount of commissioning services that the council has commissioned directly through places like the Latimer Community Art Therapy, Kids on the Green, and organisations such as that. Going forward, in relation to your particular question, what we're trying to design to do here, and of course, really welcome your comments as well, is kind of starting afresh. So schools themselves will be able to choose what suits them best. So going forward, they'll be able to pick that up themselves and say, actually, my particular school, I think you referred to what schools this money is going to, and I'm very happy to get that. We have 17 schools that are currently participating in the commissioned services that's in the Grenfell recovery strategy, and that ranges things such as early help support, trauma support, so trauma support and training for teachers and school staff. That's really helpful. As mentioned, we've had a lot of other services that we provide to the schools as well, especially around the mental health and well-being. So schools themselves will be able to progress with that themselves rather than the council saying what they need to do. And I think that's a really positive step forward because they know the community better, they know their children better, they know the parents of the children better. And once, if we get feedback that's the way they want to go, we'll be able to work with them longer term across many, many years in order to ensure that they get the best possible services going on. On your particular point, very happy to do a cost breakdown for you on the school process and forward that to you.
Thank you. Kim Taylor-Smith would like to comment. And then I think I'll go to Anne.
Well, it was really just to thank Abbas and David for coming today and for the Lanc West team, and to say that I signed off today the 8th bid on the One Public Estates Lancaster West neighbourhood, which is £400,000, and that's fantastic. And that, again, when we talk about legacies, following on from the other bids that we've had, that's a legacy of how we might identify new homes, how we create, I think it's 88 jobs I've got in the overall master plan area. So I just want to thank you for your effort for doing that, and just smiling because obviously you worked your magic on the minister when he came to see you. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we're successful in our bid. Thank you.
If I may just add, I hope whatever happens on Lanc West, RBKC will roll it over to whole borough and share all these experiences, errors, successes on our estate.
Yeah.
And everybody in our borough, have a benefit of this.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Abbas. And you'll see within the forward that we put into the bid, it does talk about how this might be rolled out and expanded. And I think this is phase 8, and let's look for many more phases to come.
Thanks.
Thank you. So Anne, would you like to come in?
Thank you, MT. And Abbas, I apologise. I couldn't hear your question, but I did hear David. So I'll answer David's, and then if I've missed anything, please do shout. I think what David was saying, my internet was just going funny. What David was saying was something that I really believe in, that these projects have to be good projects, useful projects, with good outcomes. And I think, I'd encourage you to come again to the project fund presentation, which we're now doing every month, where the applicants who were successful come and present back to the community. And the first one of those I thought was a really great show of what people have managed to achieve. But I do think we need to be more outcome focused. I think we look, we all want to have good projects, and there is some duplication for sure. I think I'd encourage you to come on the 18th of November, where we're going to be trying to gather as much feedback as possible. Please do come to that, and please do raise it, and let's discuss it and see what we can do together to make it better and more efficient and more outcome focused.
Thank you.
Abbas, did I miss anything from what you said?
Abbas, do you want to add something?
Yes, I just asked what is a long-term commitment, not just for Langfest, for the whole community. I just want RBKC just acknowledge there need to be a long-term commitment, not just that 5 years.
And can I just add to that as well, that there are other places other than Lanc West that also need support around here, and I know some of them have been overlooked. So I'm hoping that in talking to some of the smaller housing association providers around there, that you're finally filling in that gap. I mean, I know a lot of it was the way it was divided on the day by Gold Command, but I think it's important that people don't feel that they've been overlooked, even though they've suffered just the same as all of us around here.
Kim, would you like to pick up on that, or Anne?
Well, I guess I would just like to make a comment on that from my point of view as the lead member for communities. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about legacy tonight, and I think it's really important. And part of the role of this recovery fund is to create change. We have completely reimagined the way that we do engagement in the council. We have, a new vision for how that's done. I think that's been shown in the way we've done the project funds. We're trying new things, and I really hope that the long-term kind of commitment from the council is that we continue to really listen and work with local residents to co-create solutions. I think MTU said that we get to better solutions when we work with our residents, and that's absolutely the aspiration here. I think it's also about the voluntary organisations. We've seen some new organisations that were started post Grenfell. We're working with them to make them sustainable and really support their communities. I think we're going to see things come out of the project fund, which will hopefully grow into bigger projects that can support the community. So from my area, that's really what I see the longer term support is, that we just have a much more collaborative relationship with residents and listen to their needs and work with them to get to better solutions. And that's, I guess, what I see my role in what I do.
Can I just come in here? So
yes,
thanks,
of course.
Abbas. I think it's a really good point and a really good point that you make, because as Anne said, we really are committed. And as I said at the beginning, that's why these next 3 years are really important, that the consultations over the next 3 years are important, that we get this right, because these are the stepping stones to the future and that long-term commitments. And I'd just like to ask Sarah whether she'd like to come in, because we've heard from Kim and we've heard from Anne, Josh, but Sarah might like to come and talk to us about how she's changing the way commissioning works, because again, how we deliver services and how we change that to make sure that we're more responsive and that we have more impact and better outcomes, that would be a long-term legacy too.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And actually, I'd just like to emphasise what Anne and Elizabeth have both said, that, we are changing the way we look at commissioning services and involving the community much more, and we're calling it community commissioning, so we actually go out and we find out really what is the need. At the moment in adults, we have some wider community commissioning where we have targeted support from a group of providers under the Together for Grenfell umbrella, and they work with hard to reach communities. And that has been really successful so far. So we're looking at how we can grow that offer and maybe deliver some new initiatives, including peer support programs for the wider community to help with the recovery. So it's early days, but it's exciting, I think, and hopefully you can feed into the process.
Okay, so Judith Blakeman, you'd like to make another comment?
Yes, I wanted to comment that, in fact, you're not elected to represent North Kensington. The Labour Party is elected to represent North Kensington, but you have only used local councillors on the recovery strategy when it suits you, and it is high time that you started involving us fully, not just the 3 local ward councillors, but the whole of North Kensington councillors.
Thank you, Judith. I think I might go back to Camille from next of kin. I think had her hand up as well.
Oh no, oh no, sorry. I think I just didn't know how to take my hand down.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry. So I'm just listening.
Okay, you're just listening.
Yes, sorry, I don't know how to delete my hand.
Okay,
I'll
fine.
try. Thank you.
Okay, so Elizabeth, would you like to make a final comment about the report?
Yes, I think my final comment would be, first of all, to thank everyone for coming this evening. I feel it's been very positive, but to remind everyone that this is the beginning. This is just, we've reached out, we've tried to do as much engagement as we can before we've brought this framework to you, but it is only a framework. And now we need to go out and consult again and see what other people think. So hopefully by December, we'll get to a stage where the leadership team can approve this. And then we really go into the hard work of proper consultations, looking at projects, one by one, deciding what will work, deciding what won't work, and deciding on all those things with the community and listening to them and respecting them and coming back to what Abbas and David said, that it's got to have a good impact and it's got to have a proper outcome. And hopefully if we can get everything right for the next 3 years, we will have laid the foundations for a complete change in the culture of the council, but more importantly, the beginning of the recovery for the rest of the community and some hope for bereaved and survivors.
So I would like to thank everyone.
Sorry.
Camille, do you wish to speak, or is it just your hand still up?
No, sorry, I did put my hands up if it's allowed. May I just want to reiterate this point that, we've now had 2 years of this budget where close to £12 million, give or take, has been spent. And now we're talking about consulting again. So another, meanwhile, the clock is like a taxi with its meter running, because these infrastructure costs and the running costs just continue. And it just is ridiculously disproportionate to have a system where recovery budget, per year, the majority of that money, of the £6 million, is being spent on actual infrastructure costs rather than tangible things that could make a real difference. Okay. And I don't think it's justified to say, well, people are accessing the service. They're accessing it because A, they don't know what the real cost is, and they're not being informed, and B, because they're not really accessing. It's just like somebody calling you up and you take the call. If you take that phone call from your dedicated service worker, then that goes down as a tick that you've accessed it. It just doesn't make sense to be spending £60,000 a week to deliver 20 odd pounds a week to the actual victim. I don't know how you can get around that.
I'm not sure, Kimia, that your figures are quite correct, but I will write to you. I will make sure that I find exact figures, and I will write to you so we can get that absolutely straight. Secondly, I'd say, to reiterate what Callum said, we're working as hard as we can with the steering group to bring down costs, but most of those costs are frontline workers. And I appreciate not everyone wants to use the dedicated service, but for some of those who do, or those who do, it provides a decent service. But you're quite right, over the next 3 years, we need to look at the framework. We need to look at exactly how we spend the money, to make sure when we talk with bereaved and with survivors that what we're creating and what we're intending to do is guided by them, because only by that will we make sure that we get the recovery that everyone's looking for. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
My figures are correct based on the only figures that have been made public. So that's another problem, because you don't actually make the breakdowns public. Based on the only public figures that we have received, those figures are absolutely 100% accurate, and I have actually provided them to you beforehand a year ago. So,
Chair, we need to resolve this issue, because I've heard this again and again and again from Next of Kin and other groups. It's repeated again and again and again in meetings that we are spending inordinate amounts of infrastructure money and only getting a small amount out for whatever service.
Okay.
That has to, we have to resolve that. We're either paying huge amounts of money we shouldn't be paying for leases and other head costs, or we're not. Or I mean, these figures are either right or they're not. And if they're right, then we need to acknowledge it and change it. Or if they're wrong, we need to say so, because the whole of London is listening to what's being said now.
Okay, thank you for that. So what I'd like to say is I think Elizabeth has undertaken to look at the figures and to provide them and to have a breakdown. I think some have already been put on the website, some breakdowns, and also given to the individual select committees. But if everything could be pulled together and we could answer that question once and for all, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, and I think that Callum could probably do that and write to the committee, so you've got all the figures in one place for the OSE, because you may have had them across the select committees, but perhaps it would be helpful for you to have them all in one place. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you again in the spring when you looked to scrutinise what we've done till then.
It needs to be line by line. What Callum provides is he just says it's £6 million for the dedicated service, but what they don't do is break it down line by line as to exactly what that 6 million, what each line is. It's only when you see it line by line that it becomes obvious that 3.7 of it is going for everything from websites, sandwiches, stationery, on and on it goes. I mean, it's absurd, and you're talking about going forward in the spring, and by then there'll be another 10 million gone. We keep having conversations, and then it just keeps getting spaffed off the wall. To quote Boris Johnson, that's exactly what's happening. And if you've lost your family members in this fire, and you are looking at this extraordinary exploitation of the dead, you'd be very, very offended.
Callum, can you undertake to break down those figures and provide them to Camille?
I'm of course happy to provide a breakdown of the DS in full, line by line, as we did with the 1920 budget, which is the budget Camille is talking to. So very happy to provide the update that the steering group have had and have scrutinised, and sharing it with the committee and with the wider group, of course.
Okay, so I think it's time for me to thank everyone who's been here tonight, particularly Camille from Next of Kin and Abbas and David from Lancaster West. I'd also like to thank Elizabeth Campbell for coming, introducing the report and answering questions, and all the other members of the leadership team. And I think it was a good discussion overall. I think I'm very positive about this report because I like the way it stresses the importance of community involvement. And I think it is full of good intentions, which of course have to be translated into positive action. It is a start, and it's a process going forward, and we will continue to monitor it. So thank you everyone who came tonight and who contributed. And we'll now move on to the next item of the agenda, which is, I believe, the community wardens. Yes, paper A5, the community warden service. So if I invite Stuart Priestley, who is our Chief Community Safety Officer, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Committee members will recall in July I presented a community safety update which described the work that had been undertaken to mobilise the Warden Service. At that point, the service had only just commenced its operational delivery, and I committed to come back to bring an update to committee members on the work of the Wardens this autumn. So you have before you quite a brief report which summarises the activities and work of the Wardens, how the Wardens undertake their work and align to the police and the other council services, and a couple of case studies just to bring alive some of their work. And finally, there's an open offer to any committee members, excuse me, who might want to meet with the Wardens and in fact go out on patrol with the Wardens. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I should just say that I've invited my colleague Rachel Merriman along, who is the manager of the Wardens and took and led the mobilisation of the service and holds some of the more granular detail that perhaps I don't have at this point in time. I think that's all I wanted to say, and I'm happy to take questions.
If I could ask a question, I don't live in Earls Court Ward. I live very close to it and live and represent Redcliffe. You say in your report that since COVID, there has been a marked decrease in begging and street drinking and all the rest of it. I have to say that anecdotally, from my own experience and from what I'm hearing from residents, that is not the case, that actually it's got a bit worse. So I just wondered if you could comment on that.
So I think certainly the report was that section of the report, and my apologies for not being clearer. That was in regards to the initial period of the lockdown. I think that there have been a number of challenges for Earls Court area in regards to antisocial behaviour, partly or not wholly driven by other boroughs placing some of their residents, their homeless residents, into hotels within that area. So I think there's been a dynamic of a challenge there around antisocial behaviour, some of which may be attributed to those decisions, some of which might not be. My service is working very closely with housing, mental health, substance misuse, with the police to try and address those issues. We're in regular contact with the ward councillors. My colleague Rachel Merriman chairs a regular meeting with the police and local councillors and local residents to discuss issues and respond to them. But I do acknowledge that.
Okay, can I just bring in Councillor Wade? I know she's not on the committee, but she's the Earls Court councillor in the room, and then I'll go to Emma.
I would say that we still have a problem with rough sleepers, and I'm sure that Miss Merriman's post box is full of the pictures that I sent her. I think that yes, we did have a problem with other boroughs being placed in hotels, but I think that we do have an existing problem which has been discussed with the supported housing which is placed in the borough or in and around the ward boundaries, and the need for those hostels to be more proactive in the management of their clientele. There is a genuine fear that in and around the station, despite the wardens, there is an issue, and that perhaps there is the danger of displacement to side streets, as in some of the pictures that I sent through to the police today in Hogarth Road, Trebovia Road. So I think that the wardens may be able to make some difference, but I think that it needs perhaps a more coordinated approach. Thank you.
Can I also call in Emma Will? And then I'm doing it the wrong way around.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate that. Obviously, this is a paper about the wardens, but I think it's, Earls Court, there are issues we're aware of. And I think Councillor Wade has actually put her finger on it, that it's about the coordination is key here. So I spoke to the police today, and we're going to have another meeting about a separate meeting about Earls Court. But it's not just about the wardens who are doing their best, or the policing. It's about housing. It's about adult social care. It's about those other things Councillor Wade mentioned. And again, there's been some internal meetings starting to try and pull all those things together, because if you don't, if you just fix one bit, you're not really resolving the problem. So, I think we're all trying to do what we can on that. So thank you.
Okay, can I call on Councillor Beryl Cox?
Yes, I was just wondering whether you might be able to tell us a bit more about the selection of these wardens and the training they receive.
Yes, certainly. I'll actually, at this point, I'll invite my colleague Rachel Merriman, who led those processes, to describe those for you, Councillor. Rachel?
Good evening, everyone. So we conducted an assessment centre actually for the wardens, which involved a whole or most of a day of inviting all the successful shortlisted candidates into the town hall to meet colleagues from environment and communities. Everybody had lunch together. They had presentations from different council colleagues, and we undertook panel interviews, group assessments and written exercises to really understand how these people would work together. So we were recruiting 14 people all in one go, and as well as them all having the skills and abilities that we were after, we really wanted to have a team that really gelled and worked together. So we had this whole assessment centre, and that's the approach we took. Most of the people that we've employed have had experience of working as wardens or something similar in other boroughs. But despite that, they all undertake full 2 weeks of full training. So anything around legislation, health and safety training, obviously personal safety, and most of that training is delivered by colleagues from environment communities and other council colleagues.
Very much.
Can I call on Councillor Pascal?
Thank you very much, Chairman. First of all, wanted to say how much I welcomed this, how much I welcome the report, and I would like to be able in the future to meet up with some wardens if that was possible, but we can do that offline. My question is to do with perhaps could you update us on how the link between the wardens and what one might call back office is working, because I understand there's been a considerable upgrade in the IT available in back office, the benefits of new mapping systems, etc. So perhaps some update on that and whether the lessons or future opportunities would be useful.
Thank you, Councillor Pascal. I'll talk a little bit to that, and then I'll again invite my colleague Rachel, if that's okay. So being able to record residents' concerns and respond to them swiftly, being able to track the work of the wardens and their outcomes is absolutely essential to our ability to demonstrate that they're in the right place doing the right thing at the right time, and that we're closing that communication loop back to residents. So where residents have reported to us, we're able to then respond, address an issue, and then report back. And one of the ways in which we've done that is through developing a Power BI dashboard which is a specific piece of kit which records the range of the activities which the wardens have undertaken and which we can use day by day, actually, because it's updated every day. So each day we can look at the range of activities, where wardens have been, what they've been doing, and the outcomes, the activities that they've been engaged with. If I now pass over to Rachel, she might be able to fill in a little bit more of the technical detail.
Thanks, Stuart. So it was really important to us that we're recruiting a street-based frontline service, that we wanted them to be out and about on the streets as much as possible. So all the wardens have got a handheld device. It's a mini iPad, and they can input all reports while they're out and about in the streets. They haven't got to write something in a notebook, then come back to the office and input it. So it's a live sort of power app that goes directly into either report it into Accolade, which is our environmental health and noise nuisance database. We've added some extra categories of the wardens that are specific. So all that information is really live. Stuart was mentioning the Power BI app. So also on the Power BI app, we can map activity against day of the week, against time of the day, against the weather forecast. So we can know that if it's going to be a really wet sort of Monday night, it's probably the activity is going to be, or the ASB is going to be lower. We can, that on a hot sort of Friday evening, it's probably going to be busy. So we can task the wardens in different places and in the hotspot locations in the times where we need them to be, and the key activities can be in the really sort of key places at the right times.
Could I also pick up on a point that Councillor Emma Will made, that it was very important to bring together different strands of the council and partner services, the police, etc. And are the wardens connected through the system they have to be able to communicate with those other services so that they can bring them in a timely fashion as well?
Rachel, do you want to talk a bit about tasking and about the joint work that's undertaken and the communications?
Absolutely. So the Power BI dashboard really helps us understand and analyse the reports from residents and peak areas and hotspots of activity. So every Thursday, we meet with council colleagues and the wardens and police colleagues to analyse that data and look at the past week, and task the wardens and the community policing team and the neighbourhood policing team are in that, and waste and streets and enforcement and noise nuisance and licensing and all those E&C colleagues and housing and the street population outreach team and detached outreach, and we all get together and we look at that data and we share information, and we look forward to the week and the fortnight before, and we task where we think we need to be and where the hotspot areas have been identified of ASB and low level crime and activity that we need to put our efforts into and task all our colleagues towards, including the wardens and the community policing team and the neighbourhood policing officers.
I think really what I was referring to is if the warden is on the street and sees the problem in the way that that Councillor Emma Will summarised very succinctly earlier on, is the warden able to call on help from other strands of the sort of broader services and partners, specifically the police? If it starts to become an issue that the warden want to escalate to the police, do they have the means to communicate?
Absolutely. So the wardens are very much linked in with the community policing team. They've carried out joint patrols. They've got direct access to them, assuming they're on shift. They've got direct access to our CCTV control room, and direct access to the dedicated ward officers.
Thank you very much indeed.
Can I call on Greg Hammond?
Thank you very much, Chair, and may I also welcome the report. Thank you, Stuart and Rachel and everybody else who's contributed to it, and I welcome the services and everything that's been said tonight. Could I ask, well, a couple of things. Firstly, on a point of detail, is the team at the full planned strength now and fully trained, or is there more to go? I'll leave you with that one, and then I'll come back to my second question.
Yes, we are. I'll let Rachel just provide the detail on that.
Councillor, yes, we've just welcomed this week our final 3 permanent wardens. We've used agency staff in the last couple of months to backfill. So since sort of August, we've been fully staffed, and now we're permanently fully staffed. So that's 12 wardens and 2 supervisors, 14 in total.
And if they've just arrived this week, then they'll be fully trained in about 10 days' time. Is that right?
Absolutely. But they're still out and about.
On the job training then. Yes. Okay, so my second question then, table 2, page 3 of the paper. There's a rather big difference between the top and the bottom of the table in terms of where the actions have been. From Abingdon at 214 to Dalgarno at 13, it's quite a stark difference. And if I was picking out a ward that was the one that has the biggest hotspot for crime or antisocial behaviour or the other sorts of things that the wardens are addressing, Abingdon probably wouldn't be the one that's at the top of the list. Could you perhaps talk about why that table might appear so, at the moment, apparently unbalanced, please?
Rachel, do you want to talk to that one?
Surely. So Abingdon Ward actually that matches our crime picture for as well as antisocial behaviour. It's also about requests that we get from colleagues, and there are street-based service. So Dalgarno is a large proportion of Dalgarno Ward is estate, and the wardens currently don't work on estates except for Lanc West, where we're doing a 3-month pilot. We are looking at the stats and we are addressing that, and we will be tasking the wardens to areas of high need and where hotspot areas are intimated to us, and where reports are requested and requests from colleagues. We're asked for support there. So it doesn't look terribly proportionate at the moment, but we're looking at that, and we are tasking the wardens where their need is, where they're most needed, and where requests from colleagues.
And it's quite early days, I guess,
Absolutely.
in the service. So
absolutely.
Next time we review this in a few months' time, we'll have better data and a longer period, and it might have balanced out by that stage.
Absolutely, and I think it's also worth noting, Councillor, that the warden started right in the middle of the first lockdown. So antisocial behaviour, so that traditional street-based antisocial behaviour, so begging, street drinking, busking, all those things really reduced quite dramatically, and things like littering were more prevalent. And so it's not a typical picture, I think, but I think as the year goes on, and hopefully as we get back to a more normal picture, not to say that we want antisocial behaviour to increase, but I think that sort of what looks like an imbalance, but it's just a real picture of what's been happening over the last few months.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Mason.
Yes, Chair. I was, in fact, going to raise the issue that Greg just raised, but from a different angle. Of course, the wardens, as the paper says, will be weekly tasked depending on where the need is. And of course, the imbalance either suggested that they were all sent down the south instead of the north, or it's hot-spotted in the south more. Now, the thing is, weekly tasking based on hot-spotting. This is because either somebody somewhere has identified a hotspot, or more likely residents are phoning in saying this is happening in my street, this is happening in my state, and shops, etc. And by the way, all of the northern wards are not like Dalgarno. We've got Portobello and Goulburn. There's a shopping arena. But what actually happens, and it happened under the police, the paid for police office as well, that were also tasked weekly, and Stuart knows this one because I've said this so often, that many of the residents in the north won't phone the police as much as residents in the south will about problems, because in the north, you can phone the police at your risk, at risk of your health, risk of violence. If your neighbour finds out, you call the police. So all kinds of drug problems and ASB problems and all sorts of hell-raising problems can happen across the north, and does. And I invariably found during the time that we had the paid for police officers, when I asked them, did you call the police? Why didn't you call the police? They said, we can't. We can't call the police, because if they find out, if the gang finds out, or the neighbours find out, or the drug dealers find out, they'll kill us. So when we used to, back in the day, have criteria-based police, where local communities decided at the beginning of the year or every 6 months what issues needed to be dealt with in their particular area, then the police or the wardens or the PCSOs spoke to that, worked to that. Now with hotspotting, the hotspotting means that those who shout the loudest, who may not be in the most danger or have the most crime, will get the officers, and the people who are unable to or afraid to won't, and that's always been the case. So the other thing is that the table on page 3, the actions, I presume, are a whole plethora of different actions, like the case studies. They're not all, I assume, Stuart, giving out FBNs or criminal stuff. They're presumably, as it was in Earl's Court, getting homeless people off the streets, or, as you said, weapons sweep. So they're working alongside the police as opposed to working on their own. They're not working individually quite often, are they? They're working. We don't know how this exactly works yet. But this hotspotting problem, which I've said so often, Stuart, is a real problem, because as a senior officer told me 3 years ago, because when I was chair of the exec and cops, and I said, I can't get, there's such an imbalance. They're all down at Harrods with the supercars, and they're not up in my ward where there's lots of drug dealers. He says, councillor, he says, that's because they are calling more often than your people who are afraid to call, because they'll be beaten up by drug dealers. He said that's a problem. They're all down there, because I quite often phone the police.
Okay.
So the strategy is still a problem for residents in the north, my residents.
Yes. Okay. Pat, I think we'll get. Who's that?
Can I just comment on that? It's Emma Will here. Can I just comment on that? Pat, I may I say I would like to see those numbers even out. And I think a really good idea is that you might do. I had a ward walk recently with the wardens, and I found that really helpful. So perhaps we could arrange that for you in your ward. I think it would be helpful for both parties. But I just wanted to clarify something. You keep talking about crime. They're not there to deal with drugs. They might spot it and report it to the police, but this is low-level stuff. Those serious, nasty things you're talking about are still matters for the police. But I think it'd be really good to get them out with you and for you to give them some really local knowledge. I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, yes, Chair, we can do that. And it does talk about them working alongside the police doing weapons sweeps. And we're talking about weapons that are dumped by drug gangs, knives and guns and so on. So yes, I understand what they're going to be doing. But the whole hotspotting issue is a real problem for my residents and residents in the north generally.
Sorry, if I can just come in. Sorry, I should have made that clear, Councillor. So they are a percentage reactive to issues and issues that are reported by residents or by other council colleagues or by police. But they also are very proactive. So every day, all the wardens are tasked to all areas of the borough every single day. So they're a percentage reactive and a percentage proactive. So they will be in the north of the borough every single day.
And if I may just very briefly, because I'm aware of time, I just say that the tasking of the wardens does account for reports to the police, but it also accounts to reports to the council, to the various council teams in environment and communities, as well as children's, as well as housing. So there's a breadth of information that we use to triangulate the issues. to respond to. So it's not just reports to the police. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chowan. Matt.
Thank you. Okay. I just have a couple of questions, if that's okay. One on section 2 of the warden services, and the other one on engagement and enforcement of section 5. Well, to start with the first question, well, first of all, thank you, Stuart and Rachel, for this excellent and informative report. So back to the question. In section 2.1 on page 3, regarding the public spaces protection orders to tackle instances of noisy cars, I note that only a section of Brompton and Handstown is being monitored or referenced in this paper. Could you tell me why, for example, say Queensgate is not part of that monitoring?
So the establishment of the Public Spaces Protection Order wasn't actually put in place by my service, but I was involved in that, and I can talk to that. So my colleagues within Environmental Health Services led that and undertook engagement, broad engagement with residents, looked at the crime data and used that to inform the area, the geographical area of the Public Spaces Protection Order to tackle noisy vehicles. That original PSPO ran for a period of time. It was then reviewed, undertaking the same process as they used to establish it, and actually the challenge had actually changed at that point. So the geographical area, the kind of footprint, the PSPO footprint, was similarly adjusted. So I think there is a recognition that with a Public Spaces Protection Order that is within a certain location, there may be issues of displacement, or there may be other issues that pop up in other parts of the neighbourhood or the ward or the borough or what have you. And that's why there are regular reviews of those Public Spaces Protection Orders.
And thank you very much. I think that's why I asked the question, because in recent weeks we've had displacement of noisy cars in Queensgate. So that was the reason why I asked that specific question. I noticed that there's only, looking at the table, which is the second part of my question, on section 5, there was only 4 instances of noisy, 4 case types on noisy vehicles, which is quite surprising. I would have expected more.
I think, Rachel, did you want to pick up that? You may be closer to the detail on that than me.
Sure thing. So I think it's fair to say that over the summer, the incidence of noisy vehicles compared to last year, for example, was much reduced. And it's also really important to understand that the wardens have very limited powers in terms of noisy vehicles. So what they can do is, if they witness anything, is to report it to colleagues, either in the police or in Waste and Street Scene Enforcement, who manage the PSPO reports and complaints from residents. They haven't got powers to stop people. They haven't got powers to question people. It largely lies with the police to do that, and they will work with the police, and they have spent some time with the police in joint efforts around noisy vehicles, but they have very limited powers when it comes to that.
Thank you. And just to finish off my question, in terms of the 2 tables, you've got table 1, the warden cases, table 2, actions by ward. If I take my ward again, at Queensgate at 110 number of actions, I mean, it's just a figure. I mean, does that mean there's more litter dumping going on in Queensgate, or bulky waste in Queensgate? Or how do I get the kind of, it's very helpful to me if I can understand the number of actions and what they're related to.
Certainly, I can provide a breakdown for that, if that would be helpful, Councillor.
That would be very helpful. Then we can, that could help in our narrative and being aware of what the issues are. And I would certainly like to take up the offer of having a walk around with my colleagues in Queensgate Ward, and I will email you. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Mayor. I mean, Madam Mayor. Madam.
It's late. Jackie Hurd, would you like to come in? Your hand is up.
Sorry, Chair, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll go on to Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is very simple. There's a lovely grid on tables 1 and 2. But might it be possible to have a spreadsheet with the types of case on one axis and the wards on another, so we can see what is going on in which ward?
I think that's something that we could arrange for you.
Thanks so much, Stuart.
Rachel, yeah, that's correct, isn't it? Yeah, we can get that for you.
Yeah,
we can get that for you.
That would be really appreciated, because it just tells you that might tell you in some wards there isn't a problem at all with X or Y, and that all the problems of brothels and sex carding are in 2 wards, for example, and with rough sleepers are in 3 wards. I just think we'd all find that quite interesting to see which ones they are, and in particular how our own ward is or is not affected by any of these. Thank you.
Okay. So, Councillor Evans, Janet?
Yes, thank you very much. I would also like to have a ward walk, please, in Courtfield. I think it'd be very helpful. Could you tell me, please, in 2.2, you mentioned the hours and also that the wardens aren't working on the bank holidays. Can you just tell us who is providing the coverage on the bank holidays? Are you leaving it to the police? And also, I'd like to know how you worked out these core hours. So they work from 7:30 to 11, but they have core hours between 11 to 7 o'clock at night, because I think that might affect the figures. But just, can you explain that, please?
Rachel, could I ask you to pick up the detail on both of those, please?
Sure thing. So there are 3 shift patterns each day. So there is an early shift, which is from 7 a.m. till 3. There is a mid shift, 10 till 6, and a late shift, 3 to 11. So that's where you get those core hours. So most of the wardens are in and out and about on the streets between sort of 10 and 6 or 7 p.m. We've got coverage between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. Every day, 7 days of the week. In terms of bank holidays, so we know that sort of traditional antisocial behaviour reduces on bank holidays, and those matters are dealt with by the police. It would also incur quite a significant cost to the service if we were to ask people to work on bank holidays. The only bank holiday the wardens do work is over Notting Hill Carnival, so they are in for that. On the they would work on the Saturday and Sunday anyway, so that Monday bank holiday they're in for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor El Nagi, Marwan, you had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just want thank you so much for this outline. It's still, I can see it is still in early stages, but just picking up on the litter, really, that's it's quite serious because we need a cleaner borough and bulky waste and begging in terms of behavior. So these are really quite very serious high figures. And during my walk in Kensington High Street, I saw the 2 wardens walking, and this is when I was doing some shopping at Robert Dyes. And in front of Robert Dyes, there are 2 newly set up sitting area. What I've seen, people sitting there, they eat, they leave their rubbish, they drink. But then I looked around it, and there is no litter bin inside for the 2 main ones. So people, when they drop litter, and if there is no bin, which is our responsibility, isn't it, to encourage people, if they drop cigarettes or drop litter or leave anything behind, surely we need as well these to be picked up. If there is no, for one reason or another, the litter bins is not inside, you can check for yourself. I took some picture. so I can share it with you if you don't want to go down there. I think this should be in place as well. And the warden, I hope they will report that to us. That's when they issue an action against litter dropping or dump rubbish, that maybe food or finishing after meal. We need that not to be sectioned if there is no place for people to deposit it. So are you aware of, do they give you this kind of feedback, the warden, when they issue like this?
Yeah, so certainly I think the wardens are vigilant for to ensure a clean and safe borough, not just a safe borough, but a clean and safe borough. Where they encounter littering, they would encourage the person to pick up their litter and take it home with them, or to dispose of it and hang on to it until such time as they can find a bin. And they will, of course, report bags put out at the wrong time, and they'll work very closely with our colleagues in waste and street scene enforcement to share intelligence with them, so that they can take the enforcement action. It is our colleagues in waste and street scene enforcement that have primacy here in responding to waste issues, but certainly it's a priority for them, and it's certainly something that they will get involved in.
But surely these litter bins should be there in place, isn't it, to encourage dropping? Because we are encouraging them to sit in a comfortable, secured area. No?
Yes, and I don't really feel equipped to talk on part of my waste colleagues in regards to the provision of bins in the borough. I feel a bit unsighted on that. So what I will do, Councillor, is I will take away your query, and I will ensure that someone writes to you in regards to provision of bins.
Thank you so much. Very kind.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to say thank you very much, Stuart and Rachel, for coming in and bringing us and introducing the report about the wardens, who I'm sure we're all very glad to see on our streets. So thank you very much for coming to the meeting, and we will now move on to the next item. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is A6, which is the medium-term financial strategy. So this is a report that went to the leadership team yesterday, and I'm going to ask Taryn Eves, who is our Director of Financial Management, to introduce the report, and then Councillor Adrian Burrell-Cox, who's the chair of the Budget Working Group, will say a few words about how we're going to proceed looking at the budget. So Taryn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. So I won't go, I'm conscious of time, so I won't go into an awful lot of detail. So this is the Council's medium-term financial strategy for the next 3 years. It was taken to leadership team last night. So what leadership team agreed last night, so they talked through that in quite a lot of detail. I know some of you on the committee were there last night. So it sets out the overall financial position for the next 3 years, but it also marks the start of the budget process for 2021-22. So what leadership team agreed last night was they talked about the overall position, but they also launched the savings proposals and also new capital investment for consultation over the next 10 weeks. Now for Overview and Scrutiny Committee, you're a very key part of that consultation process, and you may well want to explore some of that tonight, but equally I know that Councillor Burrell-Cox is going to talk about the work of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and how you're going to take that forward. So I will stop there. I mean, it's quite a detailed report. I'm happy to take any detailed questions, but equally I'm very aware that you'll be digesting and considering the proposals in the report over the next 10 weeks. So I will pause there. And I don't know, I know Mary Will is on the call, Councillor Will. I didn't know if she wanted to say anything before questions.
Yes, I think Mary is on the call. So, okay, yeah, Adrian.
Yes, just a few words from me. We set up last year in response to a suggestion that it might be better to have a working group dealing with a more detailed analysis of the budget, a working group, and that reported on last year's budget. We are, I think, all conscious that given more time, we might have gone into more detail and perhaps made more suggestions and recommendations and so on. And it was our hope to do the same this year. The problem is, as I think Ms. Eve would say, the medium-term financial strategy has been something of a moving target, and there are a couple of very large known unknowns, specifically the likely fall in income owing to COVID, the question of business rates and the settlement with central government, which are yet to be resolved, and those have held up the actual strategy, which of course is what we'd be wanting to look at. Our plan from here on in, having effectively scoped ourselves with a great deal of help and support from Ms. Eve and Jackie Hurd, has been to set up the group, decide what we're going to look at, and decide how we're going to look at it. And specifically, our plan is over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be having so-called star chamber sessions, where we will look into each sector, supported, we hope, by people from the scrutiny functions in relation to each of those sectors and the officers, so we can get a little bit further into the reads in each section. We are then going to take the product from that away, turn it into a report, and bring it back to the next OSC, where the OSC obviously can ask its own questions and perhaps have a go at ours as well. I don't at the moment propose to add anything to that unless anybody wishes me to.
Okay, I think I'm just going to say, is it the 19th and the 23rd is when we're having these sessions?
It's the 18th or 19th and
yeah, 18th or 19th or 23rd. But I'd like to say that they are open to everyone. So if people want to come, members of this committee, whoever, even if you're not on the budget working group, you might be interested in your own subject area to come and listen and find out more about the budget. So they are open to everyone.
But to reiterate, I think we are particularly keen to have representatives of each of the relative scrutiny functions.
Yes, the chairman. But they don't have to come to all of it. We would expect the chairman to come to their section, but they are welcome to come to all of it if they want. Yeah. Okay. So just to start off, I have one question. It's a detailed one, but I don't know if Karen's going to answer it or Mary. It's about the business rates, and it's 43.4. And it goes on about the business rates, and then it goes that the loss is partly shielded by the safety net payment. And I don't know what that safety net payment is.
Shall I start off, because and I'll try and avoid to get into kind of any kind of technicalities. So in terms of business rates, so as you're aware, the business rates that we collect in the borough is around about 370 million each year. So as a result of COVID, a lot of that income, so some of that income, particularly in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, so those sorts of businesses have received 100% retail relief for this year. However, there are a number of authorities whereby aren't receiving that relief, but are obviously struggling with their business rates. Now, in terms of the loss for ours, so like I say, we're covered by reliefs on a very large proportion of that, around about 230 million of that 370. We are anticipating, as a result of COVID, a loss in the business rates collection for this year, for all the reasons that probably everybody's aware of. However, government does offer a protection in such that you can only lose a percentage. So there's almost a lower threshold that you cannot go beyond And if you lose more than that threshold, then you're protected. And that's what that safety net is. So that's what that is referring to. And with all intents and purposes, that has been in place, that safety net, for a number of years. All the time the business rate system has been in place. That isn't COVID related. What it does mean is that the loss of business rates that will be impacting on us will absolutely have a kind of a lower floor of protection. And that's what that safety net refers to.
Thank you. So have I got questions from other members of the committee? Councillor Mason, do you have a question?
Yes, Chair. Well, as you said earlier, some of us were at the leadership team meeting last night and trawled through some of it, and I sent Mary 2.5 pages of questions, which I don't propose to go through here, partly for the committee and partly for the Labour Group's own budget. But I would just make one comment, because I spoke last night about the macroeconomic of the budget, the balance between capital and revenue. There's only one pot of money, and is the balance right? And I just point out that whilst the paper tells us that we have a 41 to 42.7 million hole over 3 years because of COVID, and we're into a second lockdown now, the capital budget, which is standing this year at 286 million, which is partly funded by 152 million of borrowing and 24.5 million of revenue contributions, which is 176.7 million of that element. You'll see it all on page 6. There are other contributions. And there are 22 new bids of new investment, 13.8 million, which 11.7 million of that will come into play this year. So, and I've spoken about this since the days when we were looking at this on the Corporate Management Committee. Is this the right balance? Is a balance? And there are a lot of good things in the capital budget, but we have to cut our cloth. The more money that's loaded onto the capital end, you're going to have problems on the revenue end, especially if we can't get much more of that 40 odd million back from the government in the next 2 years. And we see the figures in one of the paragraphs about how it's going to be. I think it's 17. There's 3 years of estimated savings or cuts. Okay. So that was an issue. The balance, and it's not something you're going to decide here, but it is something you need to think about.
I just jump in?
Mary to come in, yes?
Yeah, I mean, this is a budget out for consultation, and those exactly the questions we should be asking. But it's also worth remembering that some of these, and it is an ambitious capital programme, and one that has been cut by about 17.5 million from its first iteration. And we are trying to get better sort of principles and disciplines around it. But some of these items are also spend to earn or spend to save, and have quite good business case, or have very good business cases behind them. And so we need to also, when we're looking and scrutinising this capital programme, which I hope will happen, when scrutinising it, that's one of the things to bear in mind, because some of these should bring in extra revenue in the longer term. But absolutely, have we got that balance right? Let's hear what everyone has to say about it.
We'll try to scrutinise you, Mary.
Very happy.
Yes.
That's the point.
Councillor Evans, Janet.
Yes, well, I was there last night, and I will be there on the 23rd. Mary has done an amazing job considering what she's had to deal with and the loss of revenue. And the council has really stepped up and done a fantastic provision for young people, and I'm very happy with that. So I would like to hold my further questions till the 23rd, if I may.
Okay, Councillor Hammond.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a couple, if I may. And firstly, I welcome the report, and I welcome what's been said tonight, in particular the setting up of the working group. And I think I noticed that one of the later items in our agenda tonight under A7, the budget working group members are listed. And with due respect to Linda, there's no members of the leading opposition, the main opposition party, in that group. And is that a deliberate omission? It seems quite an important working group
I think
to be.
we'll let Pat answer that one.
Yes, Pat.
Councillor Mason.
Why do I have to answer this?
Because why don't we have a Labour councillor on our working group?
Well, I think you and Adrian Bettlecox know the answer to that, and I won't be as discourteous as to say what it is here on this call.
Okay, all right.
Okay, well, I mean, it'll remain a mystery at this public meeting, but it does strike me as being a remarkable omission for probably the most important working group of any of the scrutiny committees in the year.
Greg, the minority party always produce their own budget.
And I know they do, and I look forward to seeing it. But of course, they'd be better informed in producing that if they had more oversight of the majority party's budget. So let me ask my other question then, because I'm not going to get anywhere with that. And of course, it's their choice if they don't want to be part of that working group. So revenue budget part A, paragraph 8.1.4. I know there'll be a chance to go into much more detail on this at a later stage, but this is the savings area, and the spans and layers review. It's by far the biggest area of potential savings on the list. I just wonder if we can have an overview of that tonight, please, because a lot rests on it, and how confident are the executive that that will realise the savings that are set out for it.
Shall I start on that, Mary-Therese, and then leave, and then ask Taryn to come in as well on perhaps the more mystery. So we've made good progress on this. It's a standard procedure that we've adopted, that's sort of well-tried process rather that we've gone through. And it looks at how many layers we've got and how many, for example, how many layers of management there are for each person, for each decision that's made. And it does produce some quite interesting and wide-ranging results, which make me quite confident in the figure that we've used. The other thing I want to stress about this is that I also think it's actually very constructive for staff, because there's nothing worse, more demoralising and bad for your sort of growth professionally than being overmanaged. And as well as yielding some very good savings, it's also better for us organisationally, I think. But Taryn, do you want to comment on where your confidence lies in the figures that we think this will yield and how far we've got so far?
Yeah, so thank you. So where we are at the moment, so not every service at the moment has yet gone through the exercise, but the expectation is almost over a 12 to 18 month period. I mean, I've been through it myself for financial management, so I can kind of talk with experience. It is a very structured process to go through, and it draws you to the right conclusions at the end. It's not about making rash decisions, it's about making the right decisions about what structures should look like kind of going forward. So what I would say is the savings that are predicated in the plans at the moment are based on those services that have gone through the process already. There will possibly be future savings, and we would expect future savings as those other services go through. So I would say there is some robust evidence behind the figures, and it is purely based on those services that have already gone through that process. What I would say, and again, having been through it myself, and I know that Debbie Morris, the Director of HR and OD, is going to come along actually to the working group and talk about the process in a bit more detail. So if people are interested, would encourage people to go along. But what I would say, having been through the experience myself, is it's very difficult to look at spans and layers in isolation of some other changes that you might want to do across the department. So, a lot of services are also looking at the way they do things, their operating models, more efficient ways of working. So I would just caveat that it's sometimes very, very difficult to predicate exact savings on spans and layers, because quite often there's a range of different things that are going on in departments that lead to a new operating model. But fairly confident that the figures that are there at the moment, there is the evidence behind those.
Okay, thanks, Taryn. And does that mean that as this process is ongoing, you'll be able to adjust the savings figure right up to almost the last moment as more information has come in?
Yes, I mean, so there's services going through that exercise all of the time. So there's some, like I say, there's some like myself that have completed, and we've got an idea of what those recommendations are. There are others going through now at the moment. What I would say is that it's not going to deliver all the we won't know all of the savings before we go out in April. It's going to be an iterative process, I think, over the next kind of 12 to 18 months, because even once you've been through the process, there is also a time period of when you come up, you consider your recommendations, and then you look at your new operating model. So it's not quite instantaneous. So I think some of those savings will feature into future years as well.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Councillor Pascal.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My question is a bit of a detailed one. It's to do with the, let's have a look what it's called. It's called Annex 1, Budget Pressures, and under Environment, we've got 2 years of 490 and 400, 890. Presumably that's not, could it be clarified as to what the description is to do with recycling waste disposal? Presumably this is not waste collection, because I understand the waste collection provision has come up with savings. So here the pressures must be coming from something else.
I can take that call, but I'm not sure whether somebody, does the lead member want to answer that, or I'm happy to jump in.
I'm struggling to find the page.
Oh no, sorry, not you, Mary. Sorry, I didn't know whether Jen was on the line, but I'm happy to take that. So if I start off, so yeah, the particular pressure that's referred to there, so it isn't related to the waste contract. We can see that in Annex 2. So this is actually the rate that we pay for our recycling. So we've always known that it was going to increase from 2021-22. I have to say, if you go back to financial plans a couple of years ago, so we've been anticipating this cost pressure for a period of time. It was a higher pressure that we were anticipating. So the further work that's been done with the Riverside kind of waste, the Riverside Authority has brought that down. So that is a pressure that we're expecting, but it is related to, we have been getting a reduced recycling rate, and we always knew that we was going to move back in line with what the market cost should be for that rate.
I think that the partly inherent in my question also is as to where this is likely to go in the future. Maybe going beyond the years there is outside today's discussion, but I think structurally the issue of the cost of recycling and or disposal of waste in the future is dependent a bit on how we get on with the progress of national legislation on packaging and such like. So I don't know whether there's any knowledge or interaction or lobbying with government to make further progress with the industries who produce the waste that we collect in the first place. Because even if we get people to go from the black bag to the transparent bag or translucent bag, there still is going to be more of a nasty tail to this if we don't have a better product coming in through our shopping basket.
And I think, Councillor Pascal, so I don't know the full detail, but I think that's a really good question that we should perhaps take into the working group. So let me take that away. Let's get some detail, and we can have those sorts of conversations as part of the working group, and that can kind of shape some of the feedback that's given as part of the consultation. So yeah, I'm just not familiar with the detail, I'm afraid.
I think it's a very interesting area. I remember going with Terry Oliver to one of the first joint councillor and officer working groups on the London Council's side when I was lead member in that area, and there is a big debate going on nationally but also locally with regard to how this shapes up, because it may have an effect on how we are allowed to collect our waste from our properties in our 50,000 per day. I say congratulations to our waste collection guys, but it might have a strategic effect going forward more than a couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Mary-Therese. Taryn, my question is, well, I have two. First of all, what happens if things get much, much worse and we have a worse version next year of COVID?
Oh no!
No, listen. Has anybody given any serious thought to it?
So we've given. Sorry, go on.
And I'm not expecting a serious answer, but it would just be reassuring to know that people have thought through that actually things could get worse rather than muddle along at roughly the same level. But I don't want you to answer that, but I just want to flag it up to you if people can please be thinking about that. My other question relates to the revenue strategy page and 5.2.1, where there was a 2.75% increase in salaries. And why was that if inflation is quite low? And what impact does a higher pay settlement mean? Because yes, I'm all in favour of the layers and spans and layers work, but if it means that we end up by paying people more, some of the benefit will not go back to the council taxpayer.
Okay, I'll just to comment on your first question about what happens if it does get worse. So just to give you the assurance that we are living within a very uncertain world, but we are constantly looking at what that might look like going forward. So, you know, if it does continue into 21-22, so we haven't necessarily factored anything into the budget for 21-22 as yet, but we're very much behind the scenes looking at all of those different scenarios. It's very difficult. It's based on a whole range of assumptions, but what I would say is that we are constantly revisiting those assumptions to look at what our best estimate is going forward. What I would say is that it probably isn't just COVID that will impact on the future, and there's a whole load of risks, I think, that picks up in the strategy that we are keeping a very watchful eye on in terms of progress, in terms of financial implications. So hand on heart, the position could change. This is the position as we know it at the moment. We absolutely are keeping that very close eye to see what happens over the kind of next 6 months or so, and also the current year as well. I think, you know, certainly the strategy and what we're talking about today is very much about 21-22. However, we really can't lose sight of the current year as well. So that's very much on our radar. In terms of the second question around the pay, so when we set the budget in March 2020, we'd anticipated a 2% increase in pay, so that was built into all of our budgets. The 2.7% is part of that kind of wider agreement across the whole sector. So in terms of the funding of that, we have been able to fund that from our corporate inflation provision, so that money is there. That hasn't created an additional pressure. Going forward, we make predictions about what we think those pay increases will be, but a lot of that is beyond our control. And like I say, they are sector-wide negotiations that happen. So very, very difficult to comment kind of for future years. But what I would say is we'd anticipated 2%, at 0.75 can be funded. So it hasn't created an additional pressure. But that's very much a percentage that is almost beyond our control. So we have to make predictions based on our best information. Does that answer your question on pay?
Thank you. Yes, but I'm just aware that it is very easy for, unless a beady eye is kept on it, for it to ratchet up.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I think there are no more questions because I think the hands are old ones. So, yeah, if I can say thank you to Karen and to Mary, and say that I very much look forward to the working group and looking at this budget in much more detail.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. So we move on to A7, the work programme. So what I'm going to say now is, as far as OSC is concerned, I think the budget working group is going well, and we can't actually take on another working group at the moment. But I would like to invite the chairs if they would like to say something about their own work programme. So I'll start with environment. Will.
All right, I'm almost at the right page. If I can get there.
I know it's, yeah. So yeah, just talk us through what you're going to be doing.
Okay. I very briefly, it's as it says on the tin, apart from one thing. Basically, we have two major working groups. One is on examining the delivery of the Council's 2030 net zero carbon commitment. And secondly, the development of a single resident facing customer service. I think the description there, what it's to do with is a rapid change of the way in which different streams of work in the council are operating on the street and linking up their back office and their different lead member areas and such like. And there's also a refetching of the way in which customer services is looking at changing to customer service. And I'm not being pedantic about the S, I think it's the whole cultural change about joining up, because when a resident asks a question, they don't want to know about how many different services they've got to talk to, they want their question answered. And we will be looking also at healthy homes, which will have some link into the 2030 zero carbon commitment, particularly in the council's housing area, but it's a question partly of how that's done, because it has effects on the living conditions and financial implications for residents and leaseholders, and that also links into the priorities from housing communities. So Councillor Hammond and I are beginning discussions on what the separate areas of work on those subjects are and where the overlaps are. And we may, in fact, have two separate working subgroups and then put them together in a consultation with residents. And planning policy is something that's popped up in a big way with the white paper, but also with the need for SPDs on Royal Brompton and greening and other things. The third bullet point there is going to need some reclarification at our next meeting, where we'll produce a more detailed proposal. We are having working groups, as I've said so far, but we're going to run them in a slightly different way. But rather than boring you with detail now, we'll put forward a concise note on that at the next meeting. But that's pretty much where we've got to.
Okay, Marwan, adult social care and health.
Yes, Madam Chair. I mean, let me start with the setting up of the two working groups. So one for the mental health in North Kensington, that's been set up, and I will be following with the lead member, Councillor Charles Williams, on he's leading on that group, and will be in partnership or collaboration with the Family and Children Services Scrutiny Committee. So so this will be looking at the mental health in general in North Kensington. And the other working group is the primary care working group, and which is just being set up as well. This will be looking in the primary care provisions in the context of COVID. Yeah, that's it. These are the two main focus for my working group for this this year. And then, as you can see, we're having a special meeting on the Royal Brompton merger, and that's next week.
19th, yes.
On the 19th, yeah. So things going well in there in terms of invitation and planning, and so yeah, everything in place. Recently, I've been invited as well to attend the part of the Scrutiny Committee with Hammerson Smith in Fulham Council, where they raise their key interests as well in what we are facing as a key stakeholder. And this is where we are at this point in time. So regarding health in general, COVID and the way things are going, I am as well, it's not part of the scrutiny here, but in the setting up of a healthy environment in North Kensington. So I'm looking into a mobile clinic of some sort, but this is not to do with the work program here and as such, but I see it like a supplementary in the long term. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Marwan. Janet, Family Services.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. We have a commitment to cover at each meeting COVID-19 and also Grenfell. And we will have an update at each meeting. This will also have an effect, how it affects our different working groups. For example, we're having a serious crime working group, and this year we are going to focus on domestic violence because this is one area that has really gone up during the COVID-19 situation. We are then having a single issue meeting on the Grenfell Education Fund, and so we will also bringing everyone up to date on that and reviewing some of the offerings that have been provided by the council. We will have one meeting on safeguarding of children in the borough, which is our December 10th meeting. And we are also having a paper resulting from our last meeting. We're getting a paper from the officers on the cost of uniforms and what is available to help needy families. The mental health, I'm happy to say that Charles Williams sits on both my committee and Marwan's committee, and we look forward to him bringing into giving input from the adult social services about the mental health in North Ken with a specific focus on children's suicide and children's mental health. So we have a full program and we're really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Janet. As Kazim isn't here, perhaps, Greg, you might say something about housing and communities.
Yes, certainly I can. I wasn't aware he wasn't going to be here tonight, but I'm absolutely prepared to talk about the majority of it. So we've got two working groups. The first one is one I'm leading, which is on housing safety and healthy homes. Will's already touched on one element of that, which is the element that we're going to do jointly with his committee on the 2030 target, because there's a big housing element of that in boilers, basically, in the in council property. And so we've arranged a couple of serials for early next year to examine those issues together as a joint working group. In addition, that our working group is putting out a call for evidence for what residents feel makes them believe that they are either unsafe or unhealthy at home. That's live now, but it's about to be publicised, hasn't been publicised yet. And the closing date is early December, and then we'll analyse the results and pick up a few themes to go forward with. We're doing, as a whole committee, I know Kasim's preparing for a number of single issue meetings, and the first one of those is on housing repairs, which will be on the 7th of December. And we will hopefully, if we get any repair questions back from our call for evidence, we'll be channeling them into that particular meeting so we can address them as a whole committee. Finally, the second working group is on communities, and Doris Schmetterling has just agreed to step up to chair that. And I think his two areas of focus, as I understand it, are the communities aspect of Grenfell recovery and the communities aspect of COVID recovery. But exactly what they're doing, I don't know yet, because we haven't had a report back meeting in the select committee since he took over. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So also in the report, there is an update on where we are on key decisions. And I want everyone to think about this because, I mean, the key decisions are very important. And right now, I don't feel that I am doing them properly. So I'd like to ask Jackie to come in and say where she's got with the KDs.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So at the last meeting, the committee raised a number of concerns when they were looking at the report, and I was asked to go away and look at what other councils are doing and talk to the Centre for Public Scrutiny. So that's what I've been doing. I've been doing that research to find out how other councils present that information to their committees and how it's used. There's no standard system, obviously. Councils develop their own ways of working to suit their own needs. So I will be able to bring a report back to the next meeting, but I will talk to the scrutiny chairs before I do that about the information. So I'm working very closely with colleagues in governance who are helping me to put together some information that I can bring to the chairs, and you can tell me if that suits what you have in mind.
I think Will has something to say.
I just wanted to ask a question because I was a bit unsure about how this process might work. And I mean, maybe this is something, Jackie, that you'll be answering, as you say, when you come back rather than now. But I noticed going through the list that there is a major piece of work on housing sustainability and fuel poverty strategy. I don't know how that would get fed through to us as the Environment Select Committee. It's tagged as being reported to the OSC.
The thing is, Will, everything is tagged as OSC, which means that ultimately I have responsibility for all of them. And, you know, we've discussed this, that there are too many. Yeah. I see what you're saying there, because that would be an overlap. But the way it used to be, they were directed to certain committees, even if there was an overlap. They'd just be directed to one, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I'm maybe suggesting that one way we might look at this is that there needs to be some form of central control. So it does need to go through Jackie stroke OSC. But if that one, for instance, our housing sustainability and fuel poverty strategy, works directly not only into the specification of our working group's area, but also into one of the major subject areas that we're working on as a working group in the terms of the 2030 strategy and how that's fulfilled. And it's also part of what we'll be working as a joint working group with Greg Hammond's working group on healthy homes. So in an ideal world, and I can see the difficulty of how this is actually done and the workload that involves for Jackie in particular, I guess, with her fellow colleagues, is as to how that specific item would be given to us to make a comment on. Maybe it has to be fed back through you. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. It's a question rather than a statement. But it's certainly one that we feel, well, I feel that our committee ought to have some sort of input on. It's a responsibility for us to make an input because it's in our area. But what the best mechanism for doing this within the realistic bounds of the resources that we've got is really the question.
You see, it's not scrutiny that sends them out. It's governance, isn't it, Jackie?
It is. Do you want me to try and give an answer to the points that you've raised?
Yeah. Do you want to know the reference to that one? It's 05713/20/K/A.
Okay, what I was going to do, Councillor, I wasn't going to talk about that specific KD. I was going to talk about how it works. So in the new arrangements that were agreed by the council back in May 2019, it was agreed that this committee, Overview and Scrutiny, of which all the chairs are members, would review the list of key decisions, the forward plan, and then allocate them out to the select committees if they thought they needed greater scrutiny involvement. And that's what happens in different ways. So you look at the report at this meeting, and I did actually have a look at the report before this meeting, Will, and I did identify all of those KDs, and I had a discussion with the support officers for your committee about where they would fit in with the work that you've doing on sustainability that you talked about in the last report. So they would be if they needed greater scrutiny involvement, it wouldn't be the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, it would be your committee that did it. The reason that Overview and Scrutiny Committee is listed as the main decision on the document that you look at this meeting is because when they're first put onto the forward plan, they come to this committee to decide where they should go, but also it's only this committee that can call in a decision. So even if the key decision is allocated out to a select committee, under the scrutiny arrangements, call-in still rests with Overview and Scrutiny, so it would always have a KD, the committee, against its name.
So can I make a point? 8 on the agenda is the forward plan, looking at basically doing that, allocating the decisions. There's always the last item, and it's already 9:20. What always happens is the key decisions are put on last, and people are tired and they don't pay any attention. That's what happens.
Okay,
and that's what worries me, because
could I make a comment about that? I think that this is actually such a technical and difficult procedural issue that could we perhaps discuss some way of pre-digesting this before the meeting, and then have a proposal that comes from that to this OSC to formalise the decision to allocate. Because I think that if, Jackie, you've already had the opportunity to discuss those with our individual officers, you will have a sense about whether that is important to us as a committee. I only mentioned that particular case because it was just one that was relevant. And if we just work offline before the meeting, and then at the meeting, we would be able to say that as a result of previous analysis, the proposal is that the following ones are referred to select committees, and we could then say yes or no.
Yes, the thing is, Will, that everyone gets the papers and everyone is supposed to read them cover to cover. But what in effect happens is I've done that, and nobody, I was doing this all last year. You get to it and no one says anything. So then OSC gets all the committee, all the KDs. That's the problem. You're meant to have already have read it and ticked off the ones you want. Or with Malcolm, he wanted all of them, didn't he? Remember that one, Jackie, when he wanted all of the KDs? And people, that's the whole idea. That's what should be happening now. My point is it's not. So, and that's what's worrying me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, Mary Teresa, I picked out 3. I only mentioned one. I picked out 3 from having read the papers. But I think that this way of doing it is it's sort of difficult to handle, because I think that it ought to be possible for Jackie and her officers to with involving the chairman before the meeting to agree what is proposed. Obviously, we can't decide because it's the OSC that has to decide.
Yeah, and the thing is, Will, I mean, tonight we had Grenfell.
Yes.
So otherwise you just put it earlier in the agenda so that people can actually focus on it a lot more. I think that's another thing, but we couldn't tonight. So
okay, well, I am working with colleagues on this, and I will, as I say, come back to the scrutiny chairs with the scrutiny chairs with a proposal, which is what I said I would do last time. And I've heard what you've said, and I understand what you're saying, and we will address those comments.
I mean, we only want to help here, because I think that I totally understand why it has to come through the OSC as a first call because of the call-in procedures and all the rest of it. But if we can help in a more proactive way before this meeting with our support officers, that would, I think, be a productive way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just worried that because they all come to me, if I kind of, I can miss them. I can miss an important one. That really worries me. And, I don't know, you will get more detailed knowledge of your area than I've got, if I've got to do with them all.
But I mean, to take the second one that I pulled out, which is slightly trickier. The first one I think was obviously to do with environment. The second one, which is website audit and proposed upgrade. Now, if I was sitting in your position, I don't think that I'd flag that to environment, but it's absolutely at the core of what we're looking at with regard to joining up the Crest and Wardens and the customer services website. And I know that Sophie Ellis and David Hughes and Tim Davis, to name a few officers, are all talking about how this comes together. But it's something that we're not going to be the only committee that's involved, but it does affect what we can scrutinise in our particular committee. So my suggestion is that the whole list goes to each of the 4 select committee chairmen to report back with supportive officers as to which one they feel that they would like to have a comment on or an involvement in, and that is pulled together by Jackie and yourself for a proposal to come to the OSC. I think that's the way to do it. So the whole knowledge comes to the chairman to work with officers and come back through the channel of the OSC to make a decision as to which. And I think some of them are going to need involvement from more than one select committee.
Yeah, I think that's also true.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I've heard what you've said. So I will get the information to you that I'm working with colleagues on so that we can come back to the next meeting. So that was really helpful. Thank you, Councillors.
Thank you, Jackie, very much. And thank you, Mary-Therese, as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I mean, shall we go on to the key decisions now? Or, I mean, if anyone has a key decision they would like to go to their committee, they could say so now.
Do you want me to list the ones? I've already listed one.
Yeah, you list yours.
Right. Housing Sustainability and Fuel Poverty Strategy.
Yeah.
0571320 KA.
Yeah.
And then there's website audit proposed upgrade 0546. So no, 05456 19 KAB.
Yeah.
And then Parks contract, which is 05651 20 KAB. And I think there's a mention of biodiversity as well, but we've already got that coming to our next committee anyway. So
yeah, and the other thing, I mean, Jack is aware that me and Janet have also raised the fact that they can't, because they have to get them on the forward plan for 28 days. They get put on, and quite often there is no report, and sometimes the description of them leaves you sort of none the wiser about what they're about. So I think there's a problem there as well.
Chair, sorry, if I could just say that's one of the things that we're looking at in the piece of work, because Councillor Evans has raised this issue before about the description, that it isn't always easy to understand what the key decision's about. So we're also addressing that in the piece of work that we're doing.
But also the thing about the report, because, you know, unless you can read the ones I had in the summer, the urgent ones, I got a report every time there was a report, so I could, you know, I could read it. I knew what it was about. But these ones that are on the forward plan, you could wait for ages to get a report.
I think sometimes there isn't a report because the work's just starting, so it's a notice of intent that this is work that's going to happen. So for some things, there may be some, for example, resident consultation that the directorates want to do before they actually get into the project. So that's sometimes why there isn't a report. And we are encouraging directorates to come to scrutiny early with proposals, so that you're involved at an early stage and scrutiny can shape it more in line with sort of statutory guidance, best practice about involving scrutiny earlier. So those would be some of the reasons there might not be a report. But I think that maybe if the description's improved and there's more information about what the project's actually about, we can look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it also is the case that in some areas when we're discussing one subject with a directorate and having a briefing, that it may be that something comes up that they're not even looking at yet. And part of our scrutiny work is actually to suggest to them that they might decide as to whether they need to have a policy development in a particular area because they're not covering it. They may say, well, it's not relevant, we're not going to do it, or they may say, thank you for suggesting it.
Yeah, and once somebody's got further into the project and invested a lot of work in, then you necessarily haven't got as much influence. So if you're there at the beginning, you're going to have more influence, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question?
You may, Janet.
Yes, for example, on this key decision on page 37, it says here that Grenfell Recovery, additional funding to schools for emotional support. Now, I think that's a great thing, and this is what we are going to be doing, as well as Marwan's committee is going to be doing similar things with the emotional support. So the main consultee, it says schools have been consulted and engaged specifically on this proposal. Okay, so just as a matter of, we would like to know what it is. Are we able to, is that private? It says they received information as a result of intelligence. So we would just like to know what it is. What is on offer?
Well,
is that appropriate here?
I mean, that's a good example, Janet, because it says not before the 16th of November. So today
Exactly.
we're on the 12th.
Right.
And there is no report.
No, so I have no idea what's on offer.
There is no report. So unless you get a report, how do you really know what it's about?
That's exactly it. And then someone could come and say, well, all this money is being spent, but nothing's happening. I would like to know specifically, since we have addressed it as an issue, I would like to know, and my committee would like to know, how is it being addressed? What is being done? What is on offer? What's the program? Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me. I mean, the thing is, you know, this is not Jackie's fault. This has nothing to do with her role, but the reports are not available early enough. And I think that is a flaw. And rather than going through the individual ones now, which I don't feel like, but I really think it's a flaw of the system that we are agreeing key decisions, or somebody's taking key decisions, and there isn't a report. That's what I think, anyway.
I mean, Mary-Therese, I think you put your finger on another point. There is a lot of stuff going on at the moment where reports are only available at the last moment, and we, on a couple of occasions, have had to settle for an informal response to the draft of an SPD or something, rather than it coming to a committee, because the timescales have just not fitted. I mean, there is some, and we get a lot of, and there's an overload on our individual meetings as well.
It's always been that way with the key decisions. When I was doing public realm, that's about 8 years ago now, you never got the report. So how could you actually make a proper judgment? I think Tom, I'm going to call you Janet, but I think Tom wanted to come in, and Tom might have something good to say.
Well, I'm not sure if there's anything good to say, but just to kind of reassure you that when we have sort of reports keep to the deadline of 5 clear working days ahead of the decision being made is the publication sort of schedule for them. So if there's the example you used of the key decision that says not before the 16th, that's kind of an accident from the system where we have to constantly update the date to the current month. So if there is no report available today, that decision couldn't be made until 5 clear working days after we publish a report. So you'll always have that kind of week where the report is available before the lead member can confirm the decision, and then after a lead member confirms the decision, there's then another 5 clear working days before it can be implemented, in which Scrutiny can get involved as well. So there is always that time frame around the report. Some of the dates are a little misleading in the forward plan, and I think that is a result of the software being showing its age a bit, and I think we need to refresh it generally, as well as improving how we work with Scrutiny.
Okay.
That's actually a very good point, but it would help everyone, because the other day I had, there was an increase in the budget for speech and language. So once the officer explained what it was for, it was most wonderful opportunity to work on young people's speech and language, which is a very important tool in life. So I think this could be a very positive thing if we could have some sort of idea of what is the substance here, what is on offer. I think for many areas, including the community, would see what's on offer as well.
And also thinking about the scrutiny stock take and change at the council, this would be a good way. We could say we've sorted out the KDs. It'd be a good thing to do.
Mary-Therese, if I could come up with another observation, which is that when I was a lead member, I was involved in briefings from officers on either a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, because they have work streams which are going forward for at least the next 3 to 6 months. And yes, emergencies occur, but broadly speaking, they're working to a number of work streams which are different stages of development. And I think the point was made by somebody else earlier on in this discussion, that if we were involved earlier in that process, it wouldn't have got as far as a formal KD paper. But if it's a sizable piece of work that is going to go through to being a KD, that's known about a long time in advance by the workstream manager who's responsible for that particular piece of work. And therefore, there must be a way of tying up the administrative procedures that Jackie has responsible for with the administrative procedures that are run in every single directorate within the council. So I think a structural piece of investigation by Jackie, as she's offered to do, would be extremely useful. I mean, I remember that Sue Harris, who's now got 5 directorates, has got somewhere between 60 and 70 work streams, I would guess, under her command, and those have a titration of time and quantum and importance and controversy and all sorts of things attached to them. So it should be possible to align that program with the program that we need to look at it sensibly.
Can I just throw into the mix what we have to remember? What our primary function is to hold the executive to account.
And officers.
Well, it's not really, because officers give advice. We can question their advice. Who we hold to account is the executive of the council. And, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the lead member. If they muck up, that's the way it goes. And if you're a cabinet minister, your head rolls or something. But basically, that's what we do. We can't get too entwined in. Yes, it would be helpful if we could help with policy development, but we can't get too entwined with what's going on, because we are there to take them to account, to make sure that they are performing and they are taking the right decisions and all the rest of it, which is why I'm worried about the KDs, because I don't think I'm doing it properly. But that is our function. Okay, if we can help a bit with policy development, fine. Our function is to hold the cabinet, the leadership team, to account. That is what we're for, and we can't lose sight of that.
To account for what? The carrying out policy which they've already developed, or for the direction of policies going in? Because those two are involved. I mean, all I'm saying is that whatever the protocols are in terms of the final decision making, or what we formally do as a process, the way in which work streams are managed by departmental managers and responsible to their directors is something which exists and could inform as to what areas are going to be important in the future. And Jackie could
be told about those. We could ask her to be told about those, so she could give heads up as to what areas that we should be asking our lead members about. Because the lead members, bluntly, the lead members are served up that business series of business streams, and they're advised on what areas that they need to address. And they largely work on the basis of absorbing the advice and then making decisions with regard on the basis of that.
Well,
so there is a practical way forward here to allow to use the business stream planning within the departments to inform.
I think we're gonna take this offline. Jackie is going to do some work on this. I think what you were describing, and I don't want to get into big long, it's late, but I mean, we cannot get too close to either the leadership team or the senior officers. Yes, they're because we are scrutiny. We are apart. We are separate. We are independent. And my last parting shot to everyone is going to be that we're having a stock take of scrutiny from the Centre for Public Scrutiny, and everyone has been sent round a form. I haven't filled mine in yet, but I would ask everyone to participate and fill in the form, because then we are going to, the idea of it is we can try and see where we can make improvements and what's not working.
Is that the form from Ed Hammond?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, there's been a number of hands up, which I wonder if we could hear from Barry, because he put his hand up a few moments ago, and I think
all right, Barry can come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that I meet with Jackie and Tom, because I think there are ways forward whereby the flow of business on the executive side could be more readily available for scrutiny without in any way compromising its independence. I think you're absolutely right about that, but it's important that you get the right. You can't make judgments on key decisions if you're not getting the detail of the decision itself. I fully understand that. That's plainly nonsense. But your key role, as you rightly say, is to, at an extremis, is to actually ask the leadership team to reconsider, to reject the decision. So within 5 days, they've got to reconsider that. So we need to make sure, for the smooth business of the council, that both the executive side and the independent scrutiny side not working in tandem, but certainly not working against each other in terms of the papers that are in front of them. So I suggest that Jackie, Tom and I meet with some of the other officers to make sure that each of the areas are reasonably covered.
Okay, thank you very much, Barry.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to call it a day, unless anyone has a burning desire. We'll look into it and see what we can do to improve how we're looking at the KDs. Does anyone else have anything to say?
Can I come here just for final point, Madam Chair?
Yeah, Marvin.
I'm 100% with you on that description you just highlighted. So we need more refocus, and yes, I support 100% your summary of where we need to go with this scrutiny procedure. Thank you. And thanks for Barry for highlighting and clarifying the process.
Yeah, thank you, Barry, for coming in. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barry.
Linda wants to say something, and then I think we're going to say goodnight. Linda?
Yes, I think we should probably all need to say goodnight. I think one thing that is KD's, it's not only people needing to understand what they're passing or considering, but it's also the transparency for residents who do check what's happening, and they do want to know what's happening. So I think it's not only what the KD sees, but it's actually what is seen by residents.
Agree.
That's fine. Okay. So thank you everyone, and good night. And we will revisit this topic when we can.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Marie.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jack.